Standing Committee for International Trade. This is meeting number 16. The committee is meeting today pursuant to Standing Order 1082 to discuss the impact of COVID-19 on Canadian international trade relationships, especially with the United States and the United Kingdom. Today's meeting is taking place in person, and the proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. This meeting is being televised. To ensure an orderly meeting, I have to outline a few rules to follow. Occupational Health and Safety have requested that we limit our movement in the room and wear a mask unless seated. Floor markings indicate the path of travel for all people in the room. Individuals should respect physical distancing and remain 2 meters from one another, particularly when unmasked. Seats and microphones have been placed in the manner which respect physical distancing, and therefore we ask that they remain in the same location. 3, to minimize health risks, you will note that limited personnel has been permitted to attend today. Staff have received a phone number where they can also listen in to the proceedings in real time. Please note that we will suspend in between panels in order to allow the first group of witnesses to disconnect and for the next panel to join the meeting. You will also note that we have no paper documents to be distributed. All documents have been distributed electronically to all members. Should you require a copy of the document, please advise the clerk of the committee by emailing the committee, and that will be provided. So our first group of witnesses today is from Global Affairs Canada. With us we have Steve Earle, somebody who's been seeing with our committee many times, Assistant Deputy Minister, Trade Policy and Negotiations, Chief Trade Negotiator of the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement. As well, we have Eric Walsh, Director General, North American Bureau, and Robert Fry, Director General, Bureau of European Affairs. Welcome to all of the committee members, and welcome especially to our witnesses. Thank you for making time to appear before the committee today. Mr. Burrell, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. And first of all, I apologize for the technical difficulties in getting started this afternoon. But thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you as well, members of the committee. I think that we are certainly pleased to be here today to discuss the impact of COVID-19 on Canada's trade relationships, particularly with regards to the United States and United Kingdom. I will open with some brief remarks, and then we will look forward to taking your questions. Canada is a trading nation with the world's 10th largest economy. Trade is the backbone of our economy. In fact, about 2/3 of our GDP comes from trade, and nearly 3.5 million Canadian jobs are trade related. The COVID-19 pandemic has placed global supply chains under significant pressure. It has shown us that over-reliance on a single country or supplier is a critical risk for businesses and governments. A number of countries have taken measures to restrict imports and to encourage more domestic production, in particular for essential goods. From our perspective, Canada cannot meet its needs simply by producing more at home. Our best risk mitigation strategy involves securing and reinforcing Canada's integration into global supply chains and working to better leverage our preferential trade agreements, for example, CUSMA in North America, CETA in Europe, and CPTPP in the Asia-Pacific region. We must continue to enhance Canada's reputation as a source for high quality and dependable exports, and also maintain an attractive investment environment with appropriate screening mechanisms. COVID-19 presents significant challenges, but also opportunities for export promotion. Canada's Trade Commissioner Service will continue to assist Canadian businesses in navigating these unprecedented circumstances, and this includes troubleshooting with Canadian companies experiencing supply chain disruptions, supporting priority sectors for pandemic response, and building out contact-free service models. Using existing mechanisms, including international organizations, Canada has moved quickly to work with like-minded countries to take actions that seek to stabilize trade and lessen uncertainty. Throughout this pandemic, we have continued to advocate against protectionism and ensure transit of cargo and essential goods are not unnecessarily impeded. However, in response to the pandemic, as mentioned, many countries have put in place export restrictions designed to ensure adequate domestic supply of goods. We will continue to advocate for dismantling such measures to minimize disruptions to global supply chains. And in light of our new global reality, Canada will need to respond to changing dynamics while continuing to diversify our trade relationships, seek predictable markets for our exporters, and strengthen the rules-based system. We will continue to work with our international partners to support resilient supply chains and strong trade relationships now and into the future. With respect to the World Trade Organization, as a medium-sized economy, Canada benefits from an open, transparent, and rules-based multilateral trading system. Stable and predictable global trade rules help open up new markets for Canadians and create new opportunities at home and abroad. At the core of the multilateral trading system is the World Trade Organization. The WTO has played an indispensable role in facilitating and safeguarding rules-based international trade and delivering economic gains for Canadians. Canada is at the forefront of WTO reform through its leadership of the Ottawa Group, a group of 13 like-minded WTO member countries convened by Canada initially in October 2018. It's committed to strengthening and modernizing the WTO. And the Ottawa Group is continuing to work towards meaningful reforms with efforts that complement other reform initiatives undertaken by the broader WTO membership. Canada has also worked closely with partners in the Ottawa Group on WTO reform, COVID-19, engaging in discussion on the role the WTO can play in keeping supply chains open and to ensure sustainable and inclusive recovery. In fact, on June 15th, Minister Ng chaired a virtual meeting of Ottawa Group ministers, which resulted in the endorsement of a joint statement identifying concrete action items in the areas of transparency at the WTO, agriculture, e-commerce, trade in medical supplies, and business engagement in response to COVID-19. With respect to the United States, Canada and the United States are each other's most important trading partners. Canada is working very closely with the US on this crisis, including by putting in place cooperative border measures. The United States and Canada also share supply chains for essential medical equipment, such as gloves, ventilators, testing kits, and masks. And Canada continues to work with US partners to ensure needed supplies are available to us, and to reassure Americans that what they need from Canada will also be available to them. The US-Canada trade relationship is balanced, fair, and supports growth and innovation in both of our countries. On July 1st, as you're aware, the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, or the new NAFTA, entered into force. The new agreement modernizes the North American Economic Partnership for 21st Century Trade, reduces red tape at the border, and provides enhanced predictability and stability for workers and businesses. Most importantly, the new NAFTA preserves Canada's tariff-free access to the United States and to Mexico. Reinforcing our strong economic relationships with the US and Mexico is important for the continued integration of the North American production platform and for Canada's economic prosperity, particularly in the context of post-pandemic economic recovery. The commercial relationship is large and complex, and we will continue to work with our North American partners while always advocating for Canadian interests. That includes with respect to recent reports suggesting that the United States may be considering reimposing Section 232 tariffs on Canadian aluminum. Ensuring continued free and open trade between Canada and the US is essential to both countries' economic prosperity and the continued integration of the North American production platform. The reimposition of Section 232 tariffs would undermine the implementation of the new agreement. The government has been consistent in its commitment to protect Canadian workers and companies from such unfair and unjust tariffs. With respect to the United Kingdom, Canada and the UK enjoy a unique historical relationship founded on deep people-to-people ties, common values, and vibrant economic relations. This relationship is bolstered by collaboration on key global issues, including at multilateral forums. Canada and the UK enjoy a long-standing, strong trade and investment relationship. The UK is Canada's most important commercial partner in Europe and our fifth largest globally. At this time, the Canadian and European Union Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement continues to apply to the UK, and that is the CETA, while it remains in a post-Brexit transition period with the EU. The UK and EU are currently engaged in the negotiation of their future trade relationship, and any future trade arrangement between Canada and the UK would be influenced by the terms of the agreement between the UK and the EU, as well as any unilateral UK approaches for after the transition period. This includes the recently announced UK global tariff. Whatever the outcome of Brexit, the UK will remain a significant market for Canadian companies. Canada and the UK were staunch allies long before the UK joined the EU. Our strong relationship will continue long after it has left the EU. Canadian and UK trade officials are in contact to prepare for our post-transition trade relationship. Beyond transition, Canada would be interested in discussing a new agreement that is more tailored to our bilateral trade relationship, and would be of mutual benefit to stakeholders on both sides. I would also like to note the UK's recently expressed interest in joining the CPTPP. We look forward to welcoming new members that are able to meet the CPTPP's ambitious and high standard commitments. And in conclusion, Madam Chair, we recognize that stable and dependable access to international markets is key for Canadian firms, and we are well aware of the pressures this pandemic has put on global supply chains. We are committed to continuing to work with our international partners to support the free flow of goods and services and predictable and stable markets for Canadian businesses. Thank you, and we would be happy to take your questions from here.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Bureau. On to questioning of the committee. Mr. Hoback for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. 5 minutes just doesn't seem like long enough, but Mr. Brujo, again, thank you for your service and the time you put into developing so many of the agreements that Canada has in place right now. Mr. Brujo, one of the concerns I have, and there's a little bit of confusion, so maybe you can clarify, when we settled our dispute with the U.S. and the tariff on aluminum and steel, in the letter of settlement in paragraph 5 statement, it talks about that aluminum and steel products surge meaningfully beyond historic volumes, trades over a period of time, with consideration of market share. Importing countries may request consultations of exporting country. After such consultations, the importing party may impose duties of 25% for steel and 10% for aluminum in respect to individual products where the surge took place. If the importing party takes such action, the exporting country agrees to retaliate only in the affected sector. So basically, you're saying aluminum and aluminum coating, aluminum on aluminum, steel on steel. Does this cross over now into the CUSMA agreement or not? So what options would you have to retaliate if we did see a tariff come on aluminum? I don't want you to give the details, but what would be your toolbox that you'd have to retaliate with?
Okay, well, I think first of all, the understanding, the statement that was issued back in May of 2019 clearly indicated that the tariffs that the U.S. was imposing would be removed, and it also, as you mentioned, talked about the kinds of options we would have in terms of a response. The response clearly says that that we would be able to retaliate in the case of aluminum on aluminum and aluminum-containing products. Aluminum-containing products is a fairly broad category, but I think that at this point, we really have to see what exactly the U.S. May do if it takes any action. And then we would evaluate the options and provide analysis to the political level to determine which course of action they may wish to follow.
So I'm just trying to read through that then. So it does carry through into CUSMA, and basically, if you wanted to say put a tariff on Kentucky bourbon or something like that, that would not be an option in your toolbox at this point in time.
Well, just to be clear, this is not a part of the CUSMA agreement. It's not part of the obligations contained in the formal international treaty that we've agreed to with the U.S. and with Mexico. So that does mean that there is a certain amount of flexibility with respect to that particular statement that was issued back in May of 2019. So from our perspective, I think it really depends on what kind of action the U.S. takes. If the U.S. were to take some kind of action that was viewed as being consistent with that statement, then I think we would have to think about what kind of reaction we would have and would likely want to stay within the context of that understanding. Recognizing that aluminum-containing products, for example, is a broad category. If the U.S. acts outside of how we might want to respond.
So again, last time when this happened, we took it to the WTO and we put a claim forward there. How would we do that this time when the WTO is in such disarray?
Well, I think that would remain an option for us. I think we've consistently objected to the notion that the U.S. was taking these kinds of actions for national security reasons, which we have very significant concerns about, given that we don't consider that we pose a national security threat to the U.S. There have been many challenges at the WTO and various other fora already with respect to the U.S. application of these tariffs, both on aluminum and on steel. And although the WTO appellate body is facing some challenges, we have worked with other members of the WTO to develop an alternative mechanism that allows the possibility of pursuing appeals. So I don't think that I would rule out any potential WTO action. That may be certainly something that
if you go to it's the same problem.
If
you go to the WTO and if the U.S. is not part of that process, which seems to be the way they're leaning more and more to going forward, how do you enforce it? So yeah, you've won at the WTO and other countries agree with you that this is courageous, and I think it's wrong what they're trying to do here. But what are our options? And then if you look back to our CUSMA agreement, if we are restricted to sector only retaliation, well, boy, we're really handcuffed here. So how do we move forward? You know, under country of origin labeling, for example, in the beef sector, we were able to go into, grape growers in California, apple growers in Washington State, and put pressure in those districts to get the political pressure in Washington to get the result we needed for our beef producers. It looks to me we can't do that anymore. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. No, I think that we have options on both paths. We have options in terms of how we might respond on a bilateral basis, because as I mentioned, the statement itself says aluminum-containing products. That's a very broad category. Many products are packaged in aluminum-containing packaging material, for example. So there are a number of areas we could explore on that front. And we do still have the WTO as an avenue to pursue. And we have seen decisions at the WTO that have been favorable to some countries that have challenged the U.S. national security tariffs on steel and aluminum, Turkey most recently. And so we would also have options of pursuing either initiatives at the WTO, options to pursue initiatives in U.S. courts. We are looking at all of the different potential avenues we might be able to pursue.
I'm out of time, right?
Time is up.
Thank you, Ms. Burwell.
Ms. Bedayen for 5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Merci, Monsieur Verhul, de vous joindre à nous.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Verhul, for being here. I'm a member from Quebec, and I'm clearly very concerned with this situation because the U.S. has threatened once again to impose tariffs on steel, perhaps even on aluminum. Now, Quebec has significant aluminum producers, and we've got a big manufacturing sector which would be affected, as well as consumers in Quebec. So I was wondering what's happening in the U.S. It seems that in the States, if the U.S. imposed these tariffs on Canada, it would also negatively affect its own sector.
What we're seeing in the U.S. and our focus at the moment is to really focus on advocacy in the U.S. at this point in time. In other words, to try to prevent this from happening, the U.S. reimposing tariffs on aluminum. And we have some fairly strong allies in the U.S. That are in opposition to the imposition of these tariffs. So we have been working with those interests. There has been extensive work being done with U.S. members of Congress, particularly out of our embassy in Washington. And I think it's important to note that when we look at the U.S. situation, there are two companies that are pressing for these tariffs to be reimposed. The Aluminum Association of the U.S., which represents by far the majority of U.S. aluminum interests, is opposed to tariffs being applied to Canada. Many users of aluminum in the U.S., beer companies, auto manufacturers, various others are opposed to having tariffs applied against the U.S. General business organizations, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, are opposed to tariffs being applied against imports from Canada. So this is a question of a couple of companies that are putting pressure on the U.S. to take action, but the vast majority, I think, of the aluminum industry in the U.S. recognizes that this will likely hurt the U.S. interest more than it will hurt Canadian interests. So we're doing as much as we can on the advocacy side to try to explain this and to try to explain there has been no surge in aluminum exports to the U.S. And that's the approach that we've been taking up until now.
And if I could switch for a moment to the situation involving our negotiations with the United Kingdom, you mentioned that we are, of course, looking very carefully at the negotiations between the UK and the EU, and that this would have an impact on our own negotiations. And I wonder if you could expand on that and how we can position ourselves to be in the best possible negotiating position by monitoring those negotiations.
Yes, well, certainly we are working closely now with UK officials to start to talk about how we can come up with a trading relationship that would govern our bilateral trade going forward. We already have the CETA in place, and it will remain in place until such time as the UK actually leaves the European Union. And so we're trying to position ourselves to make sure that we have an agreement in place, an understanding in place that will deal with that possible event. Our challenge in moving forward to complete this is that we don't know some of the parameters of what the UK is intending to do. We don't know whether they will have an agreement with the EU, although signs are not positive at the moment. So that's one issue that I think will have a bearing on what we can do. We know they're negotiating with various other partners, most prominently the US. We don't know what will happen on that front. And in particular, we don't know how the UK will react if they do not have these agreements in place after the transition period expires. If they are to return to the kind of approach to tariffs that would be applied against the rest of the world that they did last March, I think it was, then there would be little advantage for us having an agreement with the UK if access is going to be largely open. So there are various uncertainties here that we're having to monitor, but we're keeping a very close dialogue going with the UK. We do want to replicate the agreement we have with the EU broadly, the CETA, as much as possible. But we would also like to have something that would be more tailored to the Canada-UK agreement or the Canada-UK relationship and that's the direction that we're trying to work right now.
Savard Tremblay.
Oui, bonjour. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and hello, greetings to my colleagues. It's so nice to see you in person after all these months of physical distancing and after all these months of operating in a virtual parliament. We know there have been technical challenges. Mr. Verheul, thank you. Now, I'd like you to confirm whether my view of things is the right one or not. So, aluminum producers in the U.S. are saying that Canada is engaging in unfair trade practices. Whether that's true or not, who knows? But I don't know why the Americans are acting that way. They're accusing us of having increased our exports to the U.S. But if you look at the situation, there were delivery delays. 2 rail lines were blocked from the start of this parliamentary session. So our aluminum producers simply delivered aluminum that had been held up. There's no foundation to American concerns, and American producers are creating a tempest in a teapot. Would you agree with that assessment? It seems we've lost Mr. Verheul. No, are you there?
I missed part of the last portion of the question.
Ben, je demandais, en fait,
I was simply asking whether primary producers took normal measures, and if they had truly been, if they truly suffered, that would have come out. Are they not creating a tempest in a teapot?
Well, yes, I think that what we've seen over the past number of months, in particular since all of us have been dealing with the COVID-19 crisis, we have seen some developments in our trade on aluminum with the U.S., and we've seen patterns that we would have expected to see and that we have seen during previous economic pressures, particularly the 2008-2009 financial crisis. We agreed to with the U.S. to look at unwrought aluminum, which is a product category, and that's what we have indicated that we should look at, consistent with that agreement. What the U.S. has done is they've looked at unwrought, non-alloyed aluminum, and have not looked at unwrought alloyed aluminum. And in any kind of economic downturn or crisis where demand starts to dry up, the traditional approach is that aluminum producers, not just in Canada, but in the US as well, will shift much of their production from alloyed aluminum to non-alloyed aluminum. So if you look at the stats in more detail, you can see that there has been somewhat of an increase in non-alloyed aluminum, but there has been a decrease in exports of alloyed aluminum. So if you take those two and you look at unwrought aluminum, which includes both of those categories overall, then there is no increase. There is no surge. We see no justification for the U.S. to be contemplating this kind of action because we have had no surge. There's simply been a situation where the aluminum sector has made some adjustments, as aluminum industries in the U.S. have done, to accommodate the market demands during this particular period. We do anticipate that things will return to normal as markets start to reopen, but the U.S. allegation that aluminum exports from Canada have surged, we feel is fundamentally wrong. It does not reflect the stats, and it does not reflect the commitment we made to look at this on a product basis.
Matheson.
Thank you very much, and thank you for virtually attending today. You had said, in terms of the negotiations on steel and aluminum, or and aluminum now, in terms of those tariffs, that we have allies. We have proof that Canada isn't a national security threat. We are working to negotiate. However, those are all the things that we did before. And it didn't seem to matter in terms of the outcome with the Trump administration. They moved ahead as they wished, and to the detriment of Canadian industries. So in terms of that same reaction, you're seeming to say that we're going to be doing the exact same thing. Shouldn't we expect the exact same outcome? What specifically are you doing differently to ensure that doesn't happen?
Okay, well, thank you. Yes. We do have the benefit of the experience we had the last time around when we confronted this, but I think there are some differences with respect to what we're facing now. I think the bottom line in all of this is that the U.S. cannot meet its domestic demand with its own domestic production. The U.S. produces less than 2 million metric tons on an annual basis, but it consumes more than 5 million metric tons. So it simply does not produce enough domestically to satisfy its domestic market. That means they have to import. We have been, we would argue, the most reliable, the most long-term, the most consistent supplier of aluminum to the U.S. for dozens and dozens of years. I think that if the U.S. were to consider imposing this additional tariff on exports of Canadian aluminum to the U.S., that would obviously put a further penalty on our exports to the U.S., but at the same time, it would mean that in the context of what they say is a national security investigation, a national security rationale for imposing these tariffs, the impact would be that our exports to the U.S. of aluminum would face competition primarily from Russia and from China. So Russia and China would gain a greater market share into the U.S. on aluminum at the expense of Canadian exports. We have a hard time understanding how that relates to national security considerations, given the kinds of exports we have been providing on a consistent basis. And since, as I mentioned, the U.S. does need to import aluminum because they have insufficient production domestically, we feel that this kind of action that they're contemplating is entirely unjustified.
Well, there's no doubt, I think, that we all find it difficult to believe that we would follow this same path, but here we are along the same path, and it's sort of it brings me back to a reality that while we were negotiating with the United States on the new NAFTA, we had a particular leverage. And although trade negotiators were consistently saying that these are two separate issues, at the time that these tariffs were going forward, we had leverage. So now we don't have that. We don't have that leverage. So if you could explain why we gave up that leverage, why during those negotiations Canada agreed to allowing those two side letters in the first place, how we move out of that, and how we continue on to look for that leverage outside of an administration in the U.S. who doesn't seem to understand that what they're doing is actually harming themselves.
Well, yes. With respect to the side letter, well, they were actually statements. They weren't even side letters that we agreed to with the U.S. on the removal of the aluminum and steel tariffs. So they are not part of the formal legal agreement that we have reached with the U.S. on the new NAFTA. That means they do not have the same kind of legal standing that any kind of measures that are inside the agreement would have. So we will have to look at what, if any, action the U.S. takes against us with respect to aluminum, and we will have to determine whether that is consistent with the statements that we made on the lifting of the aluminum and steel tariffs. But we'll also have to look at whether it goes beyond that. So there will be an assessment of that as we move forward. But I think that, as you mentioned, our conclusion is that at the end of the day, if the U.S. were to impose these tariffs on aluminum coming from Canada, the impact on the U.S. users, manufacturers, the business prospects generally would be felt more on the U.S. side than on the Canadian side. So we don't think it's a wise policy decision to move in this direction if they're to do that. But obviously, we have a lot of concern that, in particular, in the context of trying to recover our economies, in the context of COVID-19, this is entirely the wrong direction to be considering.
On to Mr. Carey for 4 minutes.
So, not a lot of time. Thank you very much for the witnesses for being here. It's great to see colleagues. I wanted to talk a little bit about economic impact. I know with the original CUSMA, we begged and pleaded to get these economic impact studies. The Prime Minister didn't make them available till after the deal was done. And one of the disturbing things I saw in it on page 61, it basically said automotive would be taking a $1.5 billion hit compared to the old NAFTA. And Mr. Verhoeven, you said in your opening statement, it's so important that Canada maintains its ability to be an attractive investment environment. 2/3 of our income comes from trade, and 3.5 million jobs come from trade. And I'm really concerned about the uncertainty we have on the implementation of CUSMA and the effects of COVID on the supply chains. We had some horrible news. I'm not an MP from Quebec, but I think everybody knows that Bombardier, the company where the Liberal government made two sole source jets, they ordered 2 jets from Bombardier recently, but from Bombardier Aerospace, but Bombardier Recreational Products, the day or immediately after CUSMA came into effect, Bombardier Recreational Products announced that they'll be opening a brand new plant. But Steve, it's not in Canada, it's in Mexico. They're investing $185 million in creating up to 1,000 jobs, but not in Canada, not in Quebec. It's in Mexico. So I was wondering, what has the Liberal government done and what kind of resources has it given you to make sure that we move through this implementation, that we make sure that Canada, the message gets out that Canada is an attractive place to do business, and what have they done to decrease the uncertainty with these supply chains? Because any new investment, manufacturers are going to be looking at how are they going to get these products back and forth across the border. So what has the government asked you to do immediately as CUSMA is coming into effect to allow that to happen?
Okay, well, thank you. I think that with respect to implementation, we have been doing a lot of work, a lot of consultation with industry moving forward to ensure that the change from the existing NAFTA to the new NAFTA or CUSMA can happen as smoothly as possible. But I think probably even more importantly, we have been looking at a number of steps to take to ensure that companies in Canada understand how they can take advantage of the changes under the new agreement, how we can ensure that we can strengthen our position with respect to the economic relationship between Canada and the U.S. and Mexico as well. And a lot of our work through the Trade Commissioner Service has been dedicated to trying to help those companies reach those kinds of achievements. But I think I might want to just turn to my colleague briefly, Eric Walsh, who is responsible for the U.S. trade relations, and perhaps he might want to add a few comments to that.
before that
All
with
right.
Mr. Walsh. I know the many companies wanted the CUSMA to come into force after January the 1st, 2021, because of COVID and other factors. What is that delay? What would having CUSMA implemented now, how is that affecting the automotive companies? What's it doing to their certainty levels? Because again, I don't want to see this bleed continue in the automotive and manufacturing sector where they think it's better to build in the United States or Mexico because they don't have these issues about supply chains, et cetera.
You have 12 seconds
Well,
left.
that was okay. That was
4 minutes,
clearly a
sorry.
strong
I'm
concern
sorry.
of ours when there was a strong concern of ours when the U.S. was pressing to have the agreement come into effect sooner rather than later. We know that companies across Canada are facing enough challenges with dealing with COVID-19 that we were at least initially reluctant to have them have to adapt to new rules under the new agreement. So we've been working closely with them to try to make sure that process is as smooth as possible. And I would just add that in particular with respect to the auto sector, there are a number of provisions that allow for a gradual implementation with a number of flexibilities in recognition of the challenges they're facing now. So we do have various flexibilities that will delay some of the coming into force of some of these elements.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Sarai.
Chair, thank you, Mr. Verrill. As the Member of Parliament for Surrey Centre, and along with my colleague who's also a Member of Parliament from Surrey, Newton, Surrey is a big trading hub, whether it's ports and whether it's borders, and logistic companies have headquarters and a huge impact on our local economy. And I first want to thank you to having concluded CUSMA prior to the pandemic and having it ratified. I think it would be a much difficult task with protectionist views heightened during a pandemic, that we were fortunate to have it in place. However, we've still, regardless, due to the pandemic, have had a almost over 1/3 drop in trade amongst the two countries. I think it's 35% roughly, respectively, either way, along with our border, toughening on the borders in terms of crossing times and limited border crossings. How do you think it will be, how difficult will it be to restart supply chains and restart that trade generator that we were once before? And would CUSMA be beneficial into that, considering the problems the U.S. is having, particularly with some of its Asian partners?
Well, I think that we are certainly doing a lot of work to determine how quickly we can move back to as close to normal in terms of the trading relationships as we can get. I think the impact that you cited with respect to the trade going back and forth is those are numbers are higher than the ones that I have seen, and I think that we have been managing to maintain supply chains by and large, particularly with the U.S. and with Mexico going forward. I think there will probably be further pressure on us looking to narrow the supply chains to some degree. And in other words, putting more pressure on North America as a supply chain in itself, and relationship with the rest of the world will depend on us making efforts to maintain those supply chains as well. But I think, again, I'd like to see if Eric Walsh might have something further to add on this supply chain issue. He's been working on these issues more closely than I have.
Yes, I'm happy to jump in, and thank you for inviting me here today. I think what we can say is that both Canada and the U.S. are very close partners, and part of these complex integrated and reciprocal supply chains, which go both ways across the border. And so it's in both of our interests to allow these supplies and these people to continue crossing the border. we've seen this with the situation with PPE, personal protective equipment, and all the related COVID materials. We've had difficulty accessing inputs and raw materials, and that's really slowed down production. Logistics has been another factor in supply chain disruptions. So reinforcing our strong relationships with the US as well as Mexico is really important to Canada's ongoing prosperity. And the integration of the North American production platform, especially in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, is equally important.
UK, the first thing businesses in our neck of the woods will ask is how will Canada-UK trade deal benefit them? So if we are post the exit for Great Britain by the end of the year, what would a new trade deal look like for Canadian businesses? Mr. Verrill or
Well,
Mr.
when
Walsh?
we are talking about the Well, I will start, and in this case, it might be
Great,
Robert
it has to
Fry
be a
that might
very
want to
brief
weigh in as
answer.
well. Okay, I think that with the UK, we've had the benefit of the CETA agreement that we've had with the European Union for a number of years now. We would look to, and the UK would as well, look to translate that into a bilateral agreement. So a large proportion of that work has already been done. We would have some elements that we would want to tailor to specifically to the Canada-UK relationship, but by and large, that negotiation, in that negotiation, we have a considerable head start over other countries because we have an existing trade agreement that applies currently between Canada and the UK.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Cram for 4 minutes.
All right. Well, thank you very much to all the members of the panel for joining us today. It's good to see that we're keeping well during these challenging times. As I'm sure you're aware, pipelines are a major issue for southern Saskatchewan for two reasons. First of all, because Saskatchewan has a lot of oil and natural gas that we want to extract and export to the rest of the world. And also because many of the pipelines themselves are manufactured by Evraz Steel just outside of Regina. And so as we come out of this pandemic, I would love nothing more than to see good, high-paying jobs created in both the resource sector and in the steel manufacturing sector in both Saskatchewan and across the country. The website of Global Affairs Canada states that one of its priorities is to, quote, deepen engagement with the United States on key areas such as energy, unquote. And so my question to the panel, how is the Government of Canada meeting this goal with regards to the Keystone XL pipeline and making sure construction of that project continues both on the Canadian and American sides of the border?
Okay, I think I'd like to turn to Eric Walsh, if I could, to respond to that question.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So, Canada is the leading and most secure, reliable, sustainable, and competitive supplier of energy to the United States, and that includes crude oil and refined petroleum products, natural gas, electricity, hydropower, and uranium. In our fight against climate change, we are taking action to move to a more carbon-free economy, but every projection indicates that our economies will need significant quantities of fossil fuels up to 2040. So Canada strongly supports the completion of new and expanded cross-border energy infrastructure. That includes KXL, which the member mentioned, Line 3 replacement, and Line 5 projects. We believe this will benefit both Canada and the US, and we are working closely with the provinces and other Canadian stakeholders on these projects.
And in that, in a similar vein, what is the Government of Canada doing to make sure that Enbridge's Line 5 pipeline continues to remain in operation?
So yes, that's one of the lines I mentioned. It's very important to us. We are engaging with partners in the U.S., both at the state and federal levels, as well as regulators, to try to ensure that continues to be the case.
Very good. I'd also like to change gears and bring up the Canada-UK Free Trade Agreement. Last February, Mr. Freeland wrote a letter to the NDP member of this committee, Daniel Blakey, stating that she intends to form the House of Canada's intent to enter into free trade negotiations 90 days before they begin. When can we expect the House to be given the 90-day notification with respect to a Canada-UK free trade agreement.
Well, in this case, I think that we have been discussing trade relations with the UK for some period of time. And in fact, this is going back to probably when they first initially indicated that they were intending to withdraw from the European Union. So we've been having ongoing discussions. We came very close to reaching an agreement with them early last year when they put forward their plans with respect to the MFN tariff. But I can tell you that that Canada will clearly abide by the commitments made under that understanding, and we will move forward on that basis.
And along.
Mr. Kraft?
Okay, that same letter also indicated that the objectives of the negotiations would be tabled 30 days in advance. Have you or your department begun to write this document outlining Canada's objectives for a Canada-UK free trade agreement?
Well, our objectives for a Canada-UK agreement are very clear. We have not set them out in a formal document as of yet, but that is something that could clearly be done very quickly.
Okay.
On to Mr. Dhaliwal.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all my friends. Welcome back to Ottawa. To Mr. Verhaal, along with Randeep, we come from British Columbia, and we are fully aware of the impact of this ongoing softwood lumber dispute with the United States. Right now, Canadian parties still have pending WTO and NAFTA challenges to the Department of Commerce's underlining countervailing duty and anti-dumping duties. Could you tell us how the ratification of CUSMA will impact these challenges, and overall, could you give us some context how the new agreement might work to de-escalate the ongoing dispute between US and Canada?
Okay, thank you. I think that, well, as you well know, we've had a long-standing irritant with the U.S. with respect to softwood lumber. Given the most recent actions they have taken to reimpose tariffs, both anti-dumping and countervailing duty tariffs against our softwood lumber producers, we have been challenging those measures both under NAFTA and at the WTO. We have met with a number of successes in those efforts, and we had been hoping that those kinds of successes would bring the U.S. back to the negotiating table so that we can resolve this for the longer term. But we have not seen a willingness on the U.S. side to advance that. With respect to the new CUSMA, I think it's important to remember that any kind of softwood agreement is outside of that agreement. That is not envisioned by that agreement, nor was it envisioned by the NAFTA agreement. So when we have the U.S. pursuing anti-dumping and countervailing duty actions against our softwood lumber producers, they have a legitimate right to do that under the trade remedy provisions of both the NAFTA and the CUSMA. We have the right to challenge those. In most cases, we've successfully challenged those measures, but the decision to try to negotiate something out requires agreement on the side of both parties. We are ready to go to the negotiating table at any point in time to resolve this issue. We think it causes damages on both sides of the border, increases costs, particularly in housing in the U.S., and is totally illegitimate in terms of the application. So we're ready to go back to the negotiating table at any point in time, but however, we have not yet seen any willingness on the U.S. side to do that.
The COVID-19 pandemic showed us how fragile our global supply chain can be and how that can impact Canada. With regards to the manufacturing, can you explain how the new CUSMA might help to bring some of the manufacturing jobs that left Canada over the past few decades?
Well, I think that aside from the kinds of modernization gains that we made in the new NAFTA, particularly with respect to goods moving more easily back and forth across the border, the emphasis on regulatory reform, the emphasis on making all of these processes more modern and more simplistic. I think that going forward, we do think that there would be a greater emphasis on supply chains operating within North America, and that is the direction that we're looking at. When we take a sector like autos, for example, there are stronger rules of origin requirements that the parts, the products, the assembly of the automobiles are done on the basis of predominantly North American parts, North American inputs. We have that situation with respect to other products as well. And so I think we will see more of an emphasis on production within the North American region than we've seen in the past. And I think that we certainly expect that will result in more jobs in these areas coming back to North America, coming back to Canada. And that was a major objective in the negotiations.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our witnesses for that very valuable information today. We will suspend for 5 minutes while our next set of witnesses by video conference appears. All right, just a reminder, if you get up from your chair, you have to put your masks on. Thank you very much. Stay safe, stay well, Mr. Verrill. Nice seeing you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
All right. So again, reviewing, we're doing hearings on the impact of COVID-19 on international trade relationships, especially with the United States and the United Kingdom. I want to welcome our witnesses and thank them very much for coming back to appear before the committee. You're a very familiar group when it comes to international trade. So here we have from the Burney Investment Group, Derek Burney, Chairman. From the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Mark Agnew, Senior Director, International Policy. And from the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, Matthew Wilson, Senior Vice President, Policy and Government Relations. And from the United Steelworkers, we have Ken Newman, National Director for Canada National Office, and Mark Rollison, Assistant to the National Director. So thank you all for participating today. We'll turn it over to start with Mr. Burney.
Pardon, Madame la Présidente. Madame la Présidente.
Apologies, Madam Chair. At the beginning of the meeting, you were saying that if we wanted paper copies to ask the clerk, that's what my assistant did. But as it turns out, we did not receive the paper copies, so how can we get them in future? Because I did what we were told, but it didn't work. No paper documents are distributed during the meeting. The documents are sent to members before the meeting for printing. So MPs would have to bring their own paper copies. And in the directive we sent to all members, that was indicated. Well, at the beginning of the meeting, we were told that we could make this request during the meeting, that is, for paper copies. That's, I believe, what you said, Madam Chair.
The Madam Clerk has corrected that. I printed mine off myself. They were not supplied to me. They were sent to us electronically, and I understand it's now up to us to print them off or have our staff print them off. So I hope we clarified that. It's another.
Oui, merci de la précision.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification.
5 minutes, please.
Would you like me to begin?
Yes, Mr. Burney. Yes, please start.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair, honorable committee members. Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. If I may, I will go a bit beyond the specific topics in my remarks and offer a little more of a global perspective. First of all, I believe that the most serious problem on trade for Canada in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic is that the world is turning inwards and becoming a hotbed for protectionism. The U.S., unfortunately, is as reluctant to lead globally on trade as it has been on the pandemic. The major powers are competing for power, leaving middle powers like Canada dependent on multilateral institutions like the WTO that have been weakened by a lack of clear leadership and any real will to work together. By refusing to name panelists to the WTO's dispute settlement mechanism, the United States has severely restricted the institution's ability to safeguard the rule of law on trade. Due to the pandemic, self-reliance and self-interest are in the ascendancy. Global trade has already seen employment, production, prices, and supply chains sharply disrupted, and there is now a new public health rationale for constraints on trade under the guise of national security. A might is right trend is taking hold as countries are compelled to fend more for themselves. So what should Canada do in this environment? Well, first of all, now that the USMCA is operational, we need to defend vigorously and where possible, advance our access to the US, our most vital market, invoking the dispute settlement mechanism retained from NAFTA without hesitation and using selective retaliation when necessary. For Canada, the USMCA is a respectful salvage more than a platform for economic growth, but it should help check lunges into protectionism. Because bilateral trade is roughly in balance, there is no reason for Canada to become a passive punching bag for US protectionists and mercantilists. Arbitrary tariffs once again on Canadian aluminum exports will hurt American producers and American consumers more than anybody. This is a message that should be delivered fervently to Congress and at various state levels in the United States. We should not hesitate to retaliate. Similarly, chronic complaints from Senator Schumer, the majority Democrat leader in the Senate, about Canadian dairy policy should be rebuffed. Canada made modest concessions on dairy in the NAFTA renegotiation and should abide by them, but nothing more. Nonetheless, these attacks are a harbinger of what to expect should the administration change in November. We should stand firm. The best antidote to American protectionism, in my view, would be a robust V-shaped economic recovery. The sooner, the better. Secondly, because 75% of our trade is with the United States, diversification has always been desirable. Now it's essential. For it to become real, however, we first need complete free trade within Canada, a quest over many decades that has delivered more solemn communiques than substantive results. Most popular in Western Canada, this effort will only succeed with firm leadership from Ottawa and if economic common sense prevails over narrow provincialism, notably in Quebec and Ontario. According to the IMF, liberating Canadian internal markets would yield a 4% increase in GDP. That's much more than is expected from the USMCA. Third, free trade across Canada would also give us greater leverage and better access from other preferential trade agreements, which are the best immediate prospects for diversification. CETA with the EU, the Canada-Korea Free Trade Agreement, and the mini-TPP, which affords significant new potential in Japan, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Vietnam, among others. Number four, we should move deliberately to conclude a bilateral trade deal with a post-Brexit Britain, complementing where possible the terms negotiated in CETA, but mindful as well of the terms being negotiated by Britain with the United States. Canada enjoys more than a 2-to-1 trade balance with Britain. I suspect that their negotiators will seek to make up what they may lose from the European Union by gaining enhanced access specifically from the US, Canada, and Australia. Our negotiators should be determined to get at least as much in terms of increased access as we are prepared to give. That is the goal for any trade negotiation. Number five, Canada should actively explore the prospects for broader trade with India, despite the difficulties posed by the high degree of regulations and the protectionism in the Indian economy. This initiative can best be conducted on the basis of careful preparation and consultation, not by high-level junkets. Six, even more daunting are the prospects with China, where relations are completely hamstrung today by the deadlock over Madam Meng and the two Michaels. There is much not to like about China's behavior these days on trade and many other issues. The way supplies needed for the pandemic were hoarded before China released initial data on the virus and were then sold for huge profits should elicit worldwide scorn, if not harsh penalties. Today, we are unwilling to counter discriminatory trade actions against Canadian agricultural exports, even though China has a 3-to-1 trade advantage over us, lest it harm those in detention. We should not be reluctant to retaliate. We must also be more deliberate in joining sanctions against China for its repressive moves against Hong Kong. Canada should, like Britain, extend a welcome hand to Hong Kong refugees. We should also nimbly expand relations with Taiwan. Most importantly, we need to find a way out of the corner we have painted ourselves in, if not by an exchange of detainees, then by other means. We have become a hapless pawn caught in a dispute between two giants. Asserting self-righteous points of principle may make us feel better, but they will not break the current stalemate. We must deal with the world as it is and not as we would naively like it to be. We cannot isolate or immunize ourselves from what will soon be the world's largest economy. Mutual self-interest obliges us to gauge prudently and cautiously the prospect for a pragmatic, albeit limited, relationship proceeding as the adage about how porcupines mate stipulates, very carefully. Finally, if the U.S. is reluctant to take, If the U.S. is reluctant to take up the mantle of leadership on trade, Canada should strive creatively to fill the void, working with countries like Britain, Japan, Australia, South Korea, Singapore, and others to reinvigorate the WTO's capacity to uphold the rule of law on global trade. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Byrne. Appreciated your comments. On to Mr. Agnew, the Director for International Policy.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair and members, for the invitation to speak here at committee today. Although it's quite common for stakeholders to come and reference the critical or timely nature of a given study, I mean, I think this one really is. International trade is critical to Canada, and our relationships, both U.S. and U.K., are both critical as well. I want to touch on three issues in my opening remarks this afternoon. The first point is that COVID-19's impact on international trade has been substantial, and it certainly has brought into focus the need to strengthen supply chain resiliency. And I think we all know this and accept it. What I think most commentary has missed, though, is that supply chain resiliency is not monolithic. Each sector of the economy and even each company have different needs for what that looks like in their particular supply chain circumstances. And also, quite importantly, we are a market-oriented economy. Governments generally don't own supply chains. What they instead do is incentivize private sector behavior, and they create the conditions within which businesses operate. I think our approach to supply chains needs to ensure that we have interests of consumers and businesses in mind in terms of being able to supply inputs and products in the country and into the country that we need, but also supporting exporters. It goes both ways. And it's also much more than just the production of physical goods. Services across different modes of supply play a critical role in supply chains, whether you're talking about at the upstream part, such as research, development, and engineering design, or whether you're talking about after sales servicing of equipment or transportation and logistics. This week, the Canadian Chamber released our position statement on supply chain resiliency, which I've shared with committee staff. Hopefully, members have had a chance to look at that in advance. In short, we think the government needs to take a much more holistic approach into how domestic and international policy is used to support supply chain resiliency. The document is quite long, so really I think I just would draw your attention to a few of the international tools that we think need to be critical as part of the effort. The first is something that we're calling security of supply agreements. And what we've seen is that export controls on medical equipment proved to be a major problem during the early days of the pandemic. And what we're asking the government to do is actually to take a positive list approach with our most trusted allies and to look at a way to really actually circumscribe and tighten up how countries are allowed to use export restrictions. We're not naive and certainly realize that there would be a very small subset of countries that we'd be able to do this with. And, we are commending the work that the government has done through the Ottawa Group, and we think that this might be a way to take that work that they've done talking about transparency and time limited and proportionate and really take that to the next level in a tangible way. Secondly, there also needs to be, I think, a much greater focus on the issue of industrial subsidies. This has been a long-standing problem before the pandemic, but it's going to get worse as governments around the world throw cash at their domestic industries in huge sums. And this is going to tilt the field against Canadian companies even more so than is already the case. And we certainly need to rein in the excesses of other countries by using multilateral and plurilateral tools to do that. And then the third aspect on supply chain resiliency is in and around digital trade and e-commerce. As more activities head online, we need to make sure that our trade rules are relevant for the economy of 2020, whether that's cross-border data flows or trade facilitation measures that will support e-commerce. The second point I want to talk about is briefly the United States. And we very much welcome the entry into force of CUSMA and thank negotiators like Steve and his team that have done phenomenal work to get that deal over the finish line. However, our main message here is that it's too early to get out the proverbial sort of mission accomplished banner, if I can say that, given that we have a number of other outstanding trade issues with the United States. The specter of so-called national security tariffs looms large once again on both metals and electrical coils, and certainly we are steadfastly opposed to the United States using those and are working closely with our U.S. business counterparts and are calling on the government to be active on that issue. And additionally, we're without a softwood lumber agreement at the moment, and we're hoping that the resolution of CUSMA will create now additional bandwidth to be able to pick up this issue again and bring it to a resolution. The last piece that I want to touch on in my opening remarks is our relationship with the United Kingdom. In the absence of further developments, Canadian companies are now generally operating on the assumption that the UK will now leave its current transition status with the EU as of the end of 2020, and that it will enact its so-called global tariff regime in January 2021, which was announced earlier this year. This means fundamentally that the clock is ticking. Given that discussions have been happening for some time between the UK and Canada, our view is that we need to conclude the efforts to transpose CETA into a bilateral agreement at the earliest possible opportunity and begin the necessary implementation processes domestically here in Canada. Being fully self-aware, I know that this puts the chamber view in a slightly different spot than some of the others, but our position is informed by several factors. One, companies have already faced more than enough supply chain disruptions the last number of months. Let's give companies the certainty that they need and ensure that they won't face tariffs on their exports to the UK potentially as of January next year. The second piece of it is that based on the media reporting that we're seeing on what the European Commission has said about the status of the UK-EU discussions is that they might not be finalized until October. And so that certainly cuts very close to the end of the year. And given our own parliamentary timings, that if we decide to wait until we have complete certainty about just the UK-EU outcome, certainly that doesn't leave much time for businesses to plan, especially in the COVID-19 context. And then I think the third factor as well is that landing a bilateral agreement with the UK based on CETA positions us quite well to take the trade relationship to the next level. Out of the EU 28 countries, the UK is the one that is where we can probably have the most advanced trading relationship possible, and this includes deepening, for example, services, regulatory work, digital trade rules, and it also sends an important signal for Canada to maintain that we are the only G7 country that has comprehensive FTAs with all other G7 countries, and the Canadian Chamber represents Canada in a number of global business forums, and that's certainly a point that we're always very proud to make when we're speaking to our global counterparts when we're representing Canada abroad. So, Madam Chair, I'll stop there, and I'm certainly happy to take any questions from committee members in the Q&A round.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Agnew. On to Mr. Wilson.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee, for inviting me to participate in today's discussion. It is my pleasure to be here on behalf of Canada's 90,000 manufacturers and exporters and our association's 2,500 direct members to discuss COVID-19 in Canada's manufacturing and exporting sector. Our members cover all sizes of companies from all regions of the country and all industrial sectors. We represent the majority of Canada's manufacturing output as well as value-added exports. I'll keep my commentary short so there can be more discussion at the end. However, it is important to make a few critical comments to provide context and background. First, manufacturers have been critical in the country's response to COVID-19. Not only have domestic manufacturers made many of the goods necessary for the response, they have continued to operate and employ millions of Canadians. Despite this, the sector has been very hard hit from the crisis. Output declined roughly 30% over March and April, and we are not expecting a full recovery until well into 2022. While the impacts have been bad, it could have been much worse without strong actions by government. The wage subsidy and other liquidity measures were literally lifesavers for our members. With the crisis far from over, it is critical that these measures continue to exist and be adjusted based on economic conditions for the foreseeable future. Second, while manufacturing continued to operate and global supply chains were maintained with only minor disruptions, the lower output meant corresponding decline in Canada's trade activity. The 30% decline in output led to a decline in merchandise export activity of roughly 33% and imports of 27%. The most impacted sectors, however, were among the largest in the country, automotive and aerospace in particular. The declines in imports and exports were widespread amongst our trading partners, but obviously higher values with the U.S. given our volume of trade with that country. Notably, however, Canada did witness a massive spike of 35% of imports from China as consumers increased spending on electronics in particular. Third, it is critically important to create a plan to move the country from recovery to growth and prosperity by harnessing the strength of Canada's manufacturing sector through a comprehensive strategy. The focus of the strategy must be on driving investment to improve global competitiveness for long-term economic growth. Canada faced structural economic problems of underinvestment, soaring trade deficits, and poor productivity before COVID-19 hit that must be addressed now. For the purposes of this committee, there are several concrete actions we believe the government should take on to help Canada's exporters. First, work to implement all aspects of the new CUSMA, especially the chapter on competitiveness, which will aim to increase cooperation between the countries to deal with global trade cheats and unfair trading practices of third countries. Second, launch a Made in Canada branding exercise at home and in international markets to boost awareness of Canadian capabilities and technologies with the goal of boosting sales and exports of Canadian-made products. And third, support SME export potential by expanding investment in government export concierge programs and private peer mentoring networks, which are critical to get companies to go internationally. Finally, before making a few remarks about Canada-UK trade, I would like to note that we believe there will be some shifting in global supply chains moving forward and increased opportunity for Canada. This shift will be to protect supply chains and to meet increasing demands for consumers to buy local. However, these opportunities will flow to locations that provide the greatest returns. Canada has a huge advantage in access to many foreign markets through FTAs, as well as a skilled labor pool that is world-class. However, as a small, trade-exposed country, if our domestic business environment is not world-class, investment will continue to flow to other markets, and Canada will miss out on these current opportunities. Manufacturing investment in particular has been drifting downward since the early 2000s, which has stalled overall exports of the country and seen ballooning trade deficits. This trend must be reversed. Lastly, before turning it back to you, Madam Chair, possibility of a Canada-UK FTA is fully supported by CME. With nearly $20 billion a year in exports, the UK was Canada's third largest export market in 2019, behind only the US and China. While gold accounted for 71% of this total, other exported products total over $5.5 billion, including more than $4 billion in manufactured goods. As such, even without gold, the UK is Canada's sixth largest export market. Given this, extending the terms of the existing CETA agreement to the UK would be logical. However, we must ensure through negotiations that Canadian exporters are gaining an actual advantage over other countries who do not sign new FTAs with the UK. We understand the UK is aggressively pursuing new FTAs with many markets and offering up broad-based tariff concessions to many countries. In some cases, these tariff concessions are being made even before there is a trade deal in place. Trade agreements should be about mutual gain and benefit. If there is no unique benefit to Canada in exchange for opening our market, it undermines the value of the FTA. Thank you again for inviting me to participate, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. On to Mr. Newman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. The Steelworker thanks the CITT for the invitation to participate in the committee's study of the impact of COVID-19 on Canadian international trade relationships with focus on the United States and the United Kingdom. The United Steelworkers represents more than 800,000 members across North America, including 225,000 members in Canada in virtually every sector of the economy. We are the primary private sector union representing workers in trade-exposed sectors and regions. We also have a strong relationship with the trade union movement in the UK, specifically through our partnership with Unite the Union and our global union Workers Uniting. As such, trade policy and trade agreements are of fundamental importance to our union and to our membership. The massive drop in trade between the US and Canada, with exports down by 41% in April alone, has had an immediate impact on our members, particularly those in trade-exposed sectors such as manufacturing. At the height of the economic shutdowns, about 15% of our entire membership was on layoff of some type, including about 20% of members in manufacturing. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted fundamental problems with the international trading system and our reliance on global supply chains for essential products. We must refocus the entire trade system to one that benefits both the workers and the environment, rather than one fixated on obtaining the cheapest possible products, regardless of the conditions of production. However, we are currently focused on the United States' possible reimposition of Section 232 tariffs on aluminum, as well as the risk posed by unfair trade on the steel industry with the ongoing softwood lumber dispute. We are disappointed that these issues were not fully resolved prior to the negotiations and the implementation of CUSMA, which came into force on July the 1st. While there are positive aspects of CUSMA, specifically the labor provisions demanded by trade unions and the U.S. Democratic Party, that the Section 232 side letter legitimizes the once rare national security tariffs. and curtails our options for counteractions in the event the United States reimposes the tariffs. The possibility of 10% tariffs on aluminum products threatens the 15,000 direct and 41,000 indirect jobs in Canada's aluminum sector, including 5,000 workers represented by the steelworkers. The United Steelworkers emphasizes that Canadian aluminum does not pose a national security threat to the United States, nor has there been any significant surge in exports. This assertion is backed by the Aluminum Association, which represents the majority of the producers in the United States. Compared to 2017, exports in the first quarter of 2020 declined by 12% and were up only about 3% compared to the annual average of 2017, the last full year of any major trade disruptions. The cancellation of the original Section 232 tariffs in May of 2019, along with the end of the AIB lockout in the spring of 2019, led to the resumption of more normal trade patterns between our two countries. The drop in the U.S. aluminum prices is largely caused by the significant drop in demand. As a result, COVID-related shutdowns, particularly in the auto sector, massive growth in the Chinese production over the past 20 years remain the biggest threat, increasing from 1.9 million metric tons in 1999 to 31 million metric tons in 2019. Ultimately, Canada must strongly defend community-sustaining jobs in the aluminum sector. That means that if the U.S. does reimpose 232 tariffs on Canadian aluminum, Canada must impose retaliatory tariffs on a wide range of U.S. products and not only on aluminum. If the U.S. is not prepared to play by the rules, Canada should not be limited by the agreement signed last May. Canada must also stand up for the 22,000 direct and 100,000 indirect jobs in the steel industry. Since this pandemic, we have seen 20% overall drop of steel mill exports to the U.S. in May. This makes it even more important to grow the domestic market for Canadian steel. We could start by making sure that we not only use Canadian-made steel products in government infrastructure projects like bridges, energy projects, transits, and buildings. Canada Steel is a very low carbon and global standard, so it is the green alternative to foreign steel. But we should also implement a carbon border adjustment so that we're not placing our steelmakers at an unfair disadvantage compared to other countries that do not price carbon. Further, workers and unions should also be considered as part of the domestic industry under Canadian trade law. This should allow trade unions to initiate trade cases in order to protect the domestic workers. Canada's softwood lumber exports remain at risk, despite maintaining NAFTA's Chapter 19 dispute settlement mechanism in the CUSMA. These provisions are not enough to prevent future duties on softwood lumber. Steep declines in the forest products exports, minus 18% in May, combined with a volatile trade situation with the U.S., adds insult to injury to the Canadian forestry sector, beset by declining prices. Workers in British Columbia have been particularly hard hit by these multiple crises, as thousands of workers have lost jobs and communities have been decimated by the effects of trade disputes, low prices, and COVID-19. Looking to the United Kingdom, the steelworkers contend that any post-Brexit trade agreements must be based on strengthening workers' rights, and trade of products must be made in decent working conditions in both countries. We stand with our UK trade union allies and their opposition to the entrance into the CPTPP. Along with our partners Union Unite, we support a trade policy that includes binding labor rights and strong trade safeguards for vulnerable industries, and one that does not include investor-state dispute settlement provisions nor diminish the right to regulate. Overall, the COVID pandemic has laid bare fundamental problems with international trade system and our reliance on global trade chains for essential products. We need a broad vision and policies to ensure that Canada has the capacity to produce essential goods domestically in a manner that improves the quantity and quality of employment and allows us to meet our climate obligations. Most importantly, we need to stand up to protect jobs in the aluminum sector and to ensure that the new CUSMA does not lead to continued erosion of Canada-U.S. trade relationship. Thank you for the opportunity, and Mark Wolins and I are happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Newman. On to our questioners. Mr. Hoback.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here on a nice July day here in Ontario. I'm going to start off with you, Mr. Burney. I know you're in Colorado, but you should be in Ontario. It's a lot nicer here than Colorado today, I would swear. Anyways, you talked about the economic prosperity network that was being created in one of your articles, and that was the U.S. basically working with Japan, Australia, like-minded countries to develop a system to have each other's back in times of need, for example, like now on personal protection equipment or ventilators and things like that. Now, in discussions with other people around the world, Conservative Caucus trade members have been talking to groups, associations, other trade ministers, and we're starting to see countries form these groups or cartels where they're not only talking about having each other's back, but actually setting regs so that they have the regs set. And if you're going to trade into that block, that's the reg, that's the safety standard, that's the item that you're going to trade in, which will set the global regs. What's your comment in regards to that, and why do you think Canada should be involved with that?
Well, it goes to the fundamental point I was trying to make in my opening remarks, which is that the world is turning more to self-reliance and self-interest. And that American initiative was very much in that direction. I think a lot of countries found that they were far too dependent on China in the first instance for the supply of the kind of medical equipment that we found it necessary to deal with the pandemic.
Excusez-moi, l'interprétation a été interrompue pour cause de son insuffisant.
Interpretation was interrupted due to insufficient sound quality.
At what point was it interrupted?
Just when I spoke up. It just seems that sound quality is insufficient to allow for interpretation at the current time. Could we perhaps ask for an adjustment in order to be able to continue?
I'll just ensure that your volume is up at its maximum as well, Mr. Simard-Tremblay. Mr. Burney, would you mind to go back a little bit?
Alors, ce n'est pas mon son, c'est...
It's not my volume that is a problem. It's the interpreters who cannot interpret at this time with the sound coming from the witness. The problem does not originate with my sound volume.
Interpreters are having problems. Yes, I understood that.
Maybe you can talk. Marika, maybe we can do a sound check now.
Sound check, 1, 2, 3, and...
No, not you,
Mr. Burney.
Mr. Burney, do you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I hear you very well.
Okay.
So
can you continue to talk a bit, and Marika will tell you what to do.
It seems to be a connection problem, actually, because we do see that the bars from your connection are red. So it seems that maybe your internet connection isn't working anymore, or it's just lagging a bit, but I think that's why.
Well, I don't think I can do very much to fix that. I'm on Wi-Fi, and in the mountains that does tend to get a little bit erratic. So I apologize, but
all right.
It's beyond my technical competence to fix the issue.
I think the
Yeah,
clerk
you're
is
actually
advising
cutting
that
out.
it's
Want me
been
to try
corrected.
again?
So can you go back to the point
Back up
where
and
we
try again?
interrupted you?
Yes, I'll try. Well, what I was saying, in effect, was I think this initiative that the Americans are leading is exactly what I was referring to in my opening remarks about a world turning more to self-reliance and self-interest. And one of the lessons we've learned from the COVID-19 pandemic is that many of our companies became too dependent on supply chains linked to China. And so the Americans are trying to get I might even suggest in the context of a Trans-Pacific Partnership concept, a group of like-minded countries to ensure that we are not dependent on unreliable sources of supply for dealing with future pandemics. So I think it's an initiative that Canada should be very much in favor of. In fact, one of the earlier commenters talked about the importance of supply chain resilience. Well, this is one way that you can get supply chain resilience is if you get a network of countries to join together and ensure that we aren't caught with our pants down the way we were with this pandemic.
L'interprétation ne fonctionne toujours pas.
This is still not working for interpretation.
Okay.
And actually, you lead into the next
You want
question.
to-
I hope you're not
maybe
tying
I
up my
should
time
write it.
because of
No,
technical
I'm
difficulties.
stopping and starting and
Okay, all
make
right.
sure you get your time.
That just leads into both the Chamber of Commerce and you, Matt, and the CMEs. We're starting to see a shift in supply chains like Mr. Burney talked about, and we're hearing this from other people we've talked to where they say there's actually a huge opportunity here in Canada because we have these trade agreements around the world, because we're positioned in such a way that we can ship and manufacture. What do you think the government should be doing at this point in time to take on some of this surplus or what's the appropriate word, opportunity to take advantage of companies wanting to move part of their supply chains out of China and not be solely reliant on China and have them located here in Canada? I talked to a few companies that said, they don't want to go to 100% out of China, but they might go 60 or 70% out of China just to make sure they don't end up in a situation like they have right now.
Who, Mr. Hoback, was that to me or to Mark or to both of us? Or?
To both of you, actually. I think you both
Okay.
could quite handle it quite easily.
Sure. I'll start and then turn to you, Mark, if that's okay. Yeah, as I mentioned in my comments, we see this happening, and we see a huge opportunity. But companies are going to shift those supply chains to countries where they can produce economically and still supply. Part of the reason why companies went to China in the first place was cost competitiveness. Moving out of places like Western Europe and North America, or certainly Canada, United States, and into those markets, we'll see that swing come back. But whether we'll get it or not is entirely up to us. It's companies will shift, but they're not going to come to high-cost jurisdictions, whether it's Canada, United States, Western Europe, or other places. They still need a lower cost, to some degree, production opportunity. So some of the early surveys we're seeing is looking at places like Vietnam and Mexico as regional hubs for manufacturing products and those supply chains. But as I mentioned, I think there's a huge opportunity here for Canada as that realignment is going to happen. And it won't happen suddenly. It's going to happen over probably a period of years. But there's a massive opportunity that we can take advantage of, but we need to get our business conditions right.
Mark?
I think very much would align with what Matthew has said. There's a lot that is under our direct control that we can do to have it make fiscal and financial sense for companies. Because at the end of the day, a company can't be running at a loss permanently. And so, for example, how can we have capital cost allowances so that if you want to build a capital-intensive facility here, that's going to actually pay off for the company who's made that investment? How can we use procurement as a tool to incentivize early-stage companies to invest here in Canada? There's lots of things that are within our direct control, and absolutely we think that there's things we should be doing internationally, but we can't be thinking about only one and not the other.
Am I out of time? Okay, I trust you. Sorry, guys.
Ms. Bedian.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First, I'd like to ask Mr. Wilson from the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. My understanding from reading various different sources is that even the United States Aluminum Association has said that the United States is unable to meet the domestic demand for aluminum. In fact, they could at maximum capacity get up to 1/3 of domestic demand. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, it is. And it's largely because of integrated supply chains that developed. We have certain expertise in sourcing that goes into their system, and they have some that comes into ours. So that's why these tariffs between countries that have a common production platform make no sense whatsoever. It's the same with steel and any auto threaten or any of those other ones. They just make no sense at all in an integrated system. And you can say the same for things like government procurement policies and Buy America. It's all the same type of protectionist action that doesn't work in an integrated manufacturing platform environment like we have with the United States.
And are you in touch with American manufacturers on the other side of our border?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of the same companies, right? A lot of those companies that are using the products in the United States are the same companies that are operating in Canada, and they're our members. And we're working closely with our counterpart organization, the National Association of Manufacturers, on these issues, as well as the Canadian government, talking to the Trade Department and Mr. Freeland's office and others. So certainly we've made our concerns very well aware, and I think the government is well aware of industry concerns and the potential negative impacts both in Canada and the United States.
And speaking of the negative impacts, obviously it would mean increased prices for manufacturers, but it would also mean increased prices for consumers. Is that your impression?
At the end of the day, we as consumers pay the bill. Industry doesn't. No one, governments or industry, doesn't pick up the tab. It's at the end of the day, it's on consumers, and that's the unfortunate part about this. It is never really explained all that much, and that's why tariff reduction often happens, right? Is to lower consumption costs for consumers. But in this case, you're looking at what a can of soft drinks or adult beverages going up, 10 cents or whatever, just because of an aluminum tariff doesn't make a lot of sense.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wilson. I might go to Mr. Agnew if I still have time, Madam Chair. Mr. Agnew, in your opening statement, you mentioned the importance of our supply agreements, and I just wanted to perhaps read into the record the dates of several joint statements that Canada was involved in, and in many cases took the lead on March 25th, on March 30th, a May 14th agreement, April 22nd. So there are a number of very interesting instruments that Canada was able to sign with like-minded partners that have made a difference in ensuring that our supply chains remain open. I wonder if you could be a little bit more specific when you talk about the security of our supply agreements, of what additional measures you think that the government can take in order to continue to work towards keeping trade flowing internationally.
No, thank you for the question. So the first thing I would say is, in terms of the statements that we've been producing, they've been a fantastic initial step in that. And so very much what we're saying is to build on that and take it to the next level. Those statements at the end of the day they're not legally binding on the countries that make them. So I think the next level up is to say, okay, we've agreed to this as a principle in a statement. Let's actually now, put our money where our mouth is and, put some legal text in writing that we as countries would be willing to abide by in an international legal treaty sense. And so what I think that would specifically look like is making it much tighter around the justified grounds for countries to use export restrictions that would prohibit the production of, say, PPEs from leaving a particular jurisdiction. Because certainly what we saw in the current context is, under our current trade deals, there's a very, very wide berth to interpret what public health and national security grounds actually mean. And there's scope, we feel, to, again, make that a much tighter and more narrowly defined definition.
Thank you very much. And on to Monsieur de Savard-Tremblay.
Oui, bonjour.
Hello. Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for all witnesses for being there.
Thank you for your presentations. My question is in line with what my colleague has just done, the aluminium sector. As you know, this is a very important sector in Quebec. I'm wondering, in your sector, it's probably likely the case, are you in touch with the main client in the US for our aluminium? Automakers, they are the ones who mainly buy aluminium from Quebec. We are trying to avoid a crisis right now. We are trying to avoid the worst case scenario. Is there a way to sensitize them, to educate them, particularly since they are located in states that are particularly important for the upcoming presidential elections? Is there a way to educate these automakers so that they know that these new tariffs will penalize them enormously?
I'm sorry, was the question to me or was it someone else? I apologize. apologies. I would say that those American companies are well aware of how it's going to impact them, and they are working with the White House and U.S. trade officials to avoid the impacts on them. And you mentioned automotive. Ford, for example, most automakers would use aluminum castings for engines and other things. Ford has an entire F-150. The biggest selling vehicle in North America is almost entirely aluminum body. So the impacts on the auto sector would be massive. Aerospace would be the next one. These companies are very well aware of the impacts on their supply chain. They don't have other sources of supply. It comes out of Quebec, it comes out of Manitoba, it comes out of British Columbia. It was some supply coming out of the U.S. obviously as well, but a huge chunk of it comes from here. And so they're very well aware. Our intelligence and what they're telling us is they're working with the right officials in the U.S. to make them aware of the direct impact on their operations in the United States and their workers. And we saw this with the steel. The same thing happened. They were very quiet for a long time, these companies, and then they started getting vocal. And it was companies like Ford, companies like Harley Davidson, and others who stepped up and started talking about the direct cost of the 232 tariffs on their production, on their employees, and at the end of the day, on their products, which made them less competitive in the marketplace. So, yeah, we hear that they are talking and expect them to continue to talk. They're well aware. It's just these are political problems that bear no basis in reality a lot of times, and that's part of the problem that we're facing.
How much time do I have left? Apparently, you're saying that contacts have been established between some officials and the automakers who are located, let me repeat, in key states when it comes to the upcoming presidential elections, known as the swing states that are likely to determine who the next winner is. So you are saying contacts have been established. Are you anticipating, because we know that there are upcoming tariffs, and given that there's a normal way for primary aluminum producers that had not been used, so now they are opting for the presidential route, but that has to be presented to the two houses. According to your interpretation and the information you have, are we moving towards that option?
No, I hope, I really do hope that there is a Canadian exemption that's created in this because of the integrated supply chains. But I don't know, and it's so political. I'm not sure, but maybe others on the phone or on the call can make a better guess than I am. But I would assume so, but that's a guess at best.
Time is up. On to Ms. Matheson.
Thank you all for appearing today. Mr. Newman, you mentioned briefly about safeguard measures, and I know that during the past imposition of the steel and aluminum tariffs, the government imposed temporary safeguard measures. Now we had pushed for those to be permanent. Would you support that going forward in terms of permanent safeguards to protect against these further tariffs that our industry seems to be experiencing?
Yes, well, thank you very much for the question. And look, I fully agree. The fact is that, listening to the discussion, listening to the testimony, and as I said at the beginning, our union represents members in trade-exposed sectors and across the regions, be it in softwood, be it aluminum, steel. And I got to tell you that I don't have a warm, fuzzy feeling of what's been happening to our members in the communities where we work at. So I think that when we come out of this thing in May of 2019 in regards to lifting out of the tariffs, is that I think that we unfortunately fumbled very badly. The fact is that we have not looked after the needs and the wants of the aluminum workers or the forestry workers or the steel workers in the steel industry. And so the fact is that the government, you can't continue to reward bad behavior. I look at this file, quite frankly, as, a large percentage of the file is probably 80% is politics, and the other 20% may be based on some facts. I mean, many of the witnesses already testified with respect to what's happening to the aluminum in the United States. They can't produce what they need to consume. They depend on Canada. It's good aluminum. It's a good product. It sustains good middle-class jobs. And the fact is that the only people is going to benefit is China and Russia, and is going to be a detriment to workers in the United States in the auto sector and to the consumer. So yes, they should impose the duties and the tariffs or the countervailing permanently. The fact is that we should not be pushed around. The fact is that the government has to stand up for the citizens of Canada, and we maintained that back then, and we maintain it today.
Thank you for that. You also spoke about the targeted growth of the domestic product, the use of local skilled labor, those environmentally friendly materials within the government infrastructure programs. And I believe that actually in past testimony, Mr. Wilson has also talked about the need for the implementation of a national manufacturing and automotive strategy, combining that with our export and industrial strategies. So if you could both talk to the benefits of that, how that, Mr. Newman, would impact your members and Mr. Wilson, yours as well.
I'll pass that to my assistant, Mark Wollenson. He's familiar with that.
Well, very briefly, hello, everybody. Yeah, I mean, we've been advocating for the need for a national advanced manufacturing strategy in this country for a long time. And frankly, it's now needed more than ever in the wake of the pandemic. Mr. Agnew also referenced the fact that government procurement can be an important measure that governments can take to spur manufacturing, to spur new manufacturing in this country. I wanted to highlight one issue, though, that is relevant to this committee's inquiry. One of the issues that we had with CETA when it was signed was that it places limits in our view, or could place limits in our view, on the power of our domestic government to fully exercise the power of procurement to create jobs by excluding bidders from outside of Canada. And so we think that when you're renegotiating or negotiating a new agreement with the United Kingdom, the government should pay particular attention to preserving its ability to create jobs in Canada through the power of procurement.
Do I have a couple minutes still, Ms. Matheson, or?
How's that?
Take it.
Okay, thanks. So yes, definitely a national manufacturing strategy. Procurement should be a core part of it. We released our strategy on what what we're calling a recovery and prosperity strategy just 2 weeks ago, and met with about 75 MPs during a virtual lobby day a couple of weeks ago to present this. And we think it's critical. And not only does it help grow domestically investment, but it also helps with the export agenda. Part of the challenge on growing exports and diversifying exports and the rest of that agenda that we always talk about at this committee is if you're at maximum industrial capacity, which largely we've been at in Canada now for quite a while, you can't grow exports. There is no capacity to grow. We're sitting at about 80, we were prior to COVID-19, sitting around 83, 84% capacity. In the biggest export sectors like automotive, we were over 100% capacity. If you don't grow capacity, you don't grow exports, period. So we need a strategy that actually drives investment, that grows the sector, that grows capacity. Whether it's for procurement or for export sales, it's really important.
Okay, thank you very much. On to Mr. Lewis for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to all my colleagues. It's sure good to be sitting back here in Ottawa with you. It's great to see you all. Thank you to all the witnesses today as well. I listened with a very keen ear today. My riding of Essex is very close to the busiest international land border crossing in North America. So it's certainly good to be here. A few questions, and I guess we'll open this one up to anybody in the panel that any of our witnesses that may or may not have, or may have an answer for this. Due to COVID-19, and notwithstanding the fact that we do have to be very, very careful with our borders with regard to personal travel, but specific to economic impact, do you have any idea of the economic impact, what it looks like as the land borders remain closed, perhaps month to month or perhaps quarterly? What kind of economic impact does that have on industry and trade?
Well, maybe just to start it off, I mean, we haven't done a quantitative analysis of the impacts. I mean, we, to the extent that we have quantitative numbers, it's what the Canada Border Services Agency is already producing domestically. But in terms of the actual impact, it's quite varied in terms of everything from a Canadian company who needs to, for example, have a buyer come here in order to, say, inspect a product and meet critical attainment milestones that are linked to payments, as an example. Another one is if you're bringing in, say, pilots who need to train on flight simulators here. That can't be done virtually from a laptop at home. They need to actually go to the physical flight simulator, which again, that is another issue that we've had raised by our members. So it does manifest itself in different ways. And then I think there's also just a somewhat hard to quantify chilling effect as well. I mean, and certainly, just speaking personally, international travel, despite being in the job title, is a fairly difficult proposition if I knew that when I come home, I have to self-quarantine in my basement for 14 days.
Madam Chair, thank you. With regard to the UK, so notwithstanding the fact that, yes, we did get CUSMA done, however, it seemed as though it was kind of a last-minute, kind of a rush deal. How important is it for Canada, to get to the table early, to be number one in line to get a deal done, B, to make sure that we have enough time to get a very strong agreement so we're not rushed, and C, how important is it to make sure that we have an economic assessment before we actually sit down at the table and how that'll impact Canada?
Perhaps I can take a stab at that one, Madam Chair, if the translation will help me out. I think the first priority has to be Britain achieving an agreement with the European Union. There's very little that we can negotiate with Britain until we actually know what the terms of their agreement with the EU are going to be. We also know, number two, that their top priority is the United States. We might like to think we're up there, but actually their top priority is the bilateral agreement with the United States. It gives them the biggest bang for the buck. So I think time is on our side. We're going to know by the end of the year, by October maybe, but by the end of the year for sure, what sort of terms Britain extracts or the EU extracts from Britain. And then we have a fundamental choice to make, in my view. We decide either to roll over the terms of CETA into a bilateral with Britain, or we start from scratch with a fresh bilateral. But they will give priority to the United States because that's their most important market. We should stand back, watch what the Americans get, make sure we get no less.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Aya, please, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is to Mark and Matthew. This pandemic, for the first time in the history of the world, every country have been hit economically. So I would like to know that whether this will fundamentally change the global trade. Can we expect the global trade to grow, to decrease, or to remain neutral in the next 3 to 5 years? Do you see any pushback in the global trade?
So, I mean, maybe just to kick it off before handing it over to Matt. I mean, certainly the World Trade Organization has done quite a lot of interesting work through its leading indicators on, what they're seeing around the world in transportation and logistics. And so absolutely, there will be a decrease. What the growth path looks like in terms of global trade, is it a U shape? Is it a W? Is it a V? Is it something else? I mean, I think only time will tell, but given the gravity of what's happened, I think every company is looking at its supply chains in a very serious way, in a way that frankly they haven't had to in the past. And it's probably good actually that this has forced them to at least know more than just kind of a superficial one level down what is happening in their supply chain. The other, I think, quite concerning impact for businesses is what's happening with the U.S.-China dynamic. Anytime you pick up a newspaper or go to the the website of a given news outlet, it's not looking good at the moment. We're talking tit for tat trade wars. We're talking, the U.S. even putting national security tariffs on Canada. It's a very bad environment for Canadian businesses.
So I'll just maybe add a couple things, and we certainly see a long haul out of this. This is not going to recover. it will recover eventually. Everything always does, but it's going to take a while, and there will be some shifts in those supply chains. But for Canada, we can't forget that 3/4 of our trade is with the United States, and the vast majority of that is in manufactured goods, and a lot of it is in like automotive and aerospace and food. So a lot of Canada's specific trade volumes come down to a handful of sectors that are interlaced with the U.S. or in commodities that are traded with China and other markets around the world that still have strong demands for them. So we think that it'll be a long slog to come out of this from a trade perspective, but a lot of our Canada specific trade volume will be tied up in U.S. consumer demand. Cars, if people don't buy cars, there's not going to be a lot
Now,
of trade
because of
going
my
back
time
to
limitation, I got just one more question to both of you again. If there's one thing that you want to change, we have all the free trade agreements with almost 50 countries across the world. So that phase is done. What is that we need to do here in Canada to make use of these free trade agreements? What is one fundamental thing that we have to focus on in this post-COVID-19 world?
We have to help small companies access those foreign markets. We do a terrible job in Canada overall. Very, very few companies actually export. If we don't get more small companies exporting, we will never change the dynamic in this. This is not a new thing. This predates COVID-19. It's just highlighted more so by COVID-19. Small companies need to export more.
Mark, what about you?
I agree with what Matthew said on SMEs. What I would say to build on that is using regulatory cooperation mechanisms. It's great if tariffs come down, but if the regulatory measures aren't aligned or they keep out a company, then the tariff liberalization is a moot point. And we've seen that, for example, in the case of CETA and some of the agriculture issues that Canadian companies have run into.
Our GDP, 60% comes from trade, but 75% of our trade is with the US. Why is it that we have not been able to increase trade with other regions in the world?
Because we're complacent. That's the simple answer.
Yes, probably.
Well, because we have a huge customer right at our door, and we're reluctant to go much further beyond to find new customers. We're not taking adequate advantage from the other preferential free trade agreements we've already got. That's a point I tried to make in my opening remarks. Canada, Korea, CETA, the mini TPP. We have an edge over the Americans on the mini TPP, but are we taking advantage of it? I don't think so.
Thank you very much. Okay, on to Mr. Carey.
Madam Chair, I'd like to start off with Mr. Agnew. You did send us some recommendations to strengthen the supply chain resiliency. I wondered if you could elaborate a little bit in the domestic policy. You mentioned free trade zones, and I was wondering if you could expand on that. Coming from Durham Region, the Pickering Airport project is, we have a lot of land there, a potential great economic driver, and I was wondering if you have any examples from around the world where they do this well. And how could we benefit from these free trade zones? Could you expand, please?
Well, thank you for the question. So we're just starting our work to dig into this now in more detail. But I mean, the headline message is the current rules are best described as FTZ-like policies. If I think a company comes in and they talk about FTZs, they're having an expectation of much more flexibility with what they can do in terms of value-added processing in that area. And so that really would be the headline ask, is loosening up the rules to enable there to be a greater level of value-added production that could happen in a Canadian free trade zone.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Burney, you mentioned in your opening statements how the world is turning inwards, particularly post-COVID. You mentioned some of the challenges with our southern neighbor, the comments from Mr. Schumer. I know Mr. Biden has now said that he doesn't agree with the Keystone XL, and you mentioned the importance of expanding our trade agreements and diversification. I was wondering if you could comment on our relationship with Britain. I know Britain now, I believe they're in talks with the United States. Japan, New Zealand, Australia. It seems that we're not even at the table for some of these agreements. But if the British would like to work with us, we could do a bilateral, or they're interested in getting involved with the TPP. Could you explain the advantages or disadvantages if Canada did a bilateral versus, say, invited or had the UK join the TPP?
Well, my sense is that their own preference is a bilateral with Canada. It's not as important a relationship for them as it is for us. I think we have a more than a 2-to-1 advantage in terms of our trade balance with Britain. But as I said earlier, I think that it's very difficult for anybody to be negotiating with Britain right now because they're totally preoccupied with getting out of the European Union. And keep in mind, they don't have a deep roster of trade negotiators because all the British negotiators were part of the EU. So they're starting from the ground up, trying to train a whole new team of trade negotiators. And I think they're focused right now on the EU. The Americans are number one for them, but nothing's going to happen in the United States on a trade agreement with Britain or anybody else for the rest of this year because we're into the, as they call it, the silly season in Washington. It's been pretty silly for 3 years now, but in any event, they're in the silly season of their election. So nothing is going to happen this year. First thing that's got to happen is Britain has got to settle its hash with the European Union. Only then can countries like Canada, Australia, and the United States decide which way we want to go. Is it to roll over CETA into a bilateral or strike a whole new bilateral? That's a decision we'll have to make once we know better what Britain's situation is coming out of the EU.
Okay.
Sorry about that. On to Mr. Shirai.
Thank you. Maybe I'll start with you, Mr. Burney. You've had close relations with the U.S., worked quite extensively there. What's your thoughts on the American response to the recovery, whether it's the health aspect, their election, their economy, and how important is that to Canada's economic recovery post this pandemic, or even, I guess, once it restarts the economy?
Well, as I said in my opening remarks, I think that the best antidote to the protectionism which is taking root in the United States aggressively right now would be a robust recovery of the U.S. economy. There's no better tonic for protectionism than economic growth. Do I see that happening? Well, there are some signs that the American economy is coming back a little more smartly than their effort to control the pandemic. It's kind of a very mixed message from the United States today. But I have to assume that the Americans are very versatile in responding to crises. And I think that the chances of a strong economic recovery, maybe I'm not as pessimistic as some of the colleagues on the panel here, I think it will come in 2021. I don't think we'll have to wait for 2022. I think even our finance minister is predicting a 6% growth in our economy next year. So that will be good. The best tonic for protectionism is economic growth.
Okay, thank you. My next question is to Mark. One of your recommendations is infrastructure, particularly infrastructure to enable supply chains. Can you elaborate on that? I'm very. It's usually a very popular thing to do for a recovery, and specifically after this. And if it gives long-term benefits, it's even better. And we've seen in British Columbia the benefits of the Gateway, Asian Gateway, and the Gateway projects, which kind of improved a lot of our ports and our transportation corridors. Is that what you're envisioning, more improvement on that type of infrastructure? Or if you can let us know, it'd be great to hear.
No, it is precisely those types of things, ports and airports. I mean, this isn't anything new, and I'm not trying to pretend it is. The reality, as always, for these infrastructure funds is that the demand way outstrips the supply of money available. And so really this is about putting more cash into the National Trade Corridors Fund to open it back up again for organizations to be able to tap into and to build those projects.
In terms of your free trade zones, you had spoken just earlier about them. I don't know how much time I have, but how feasible are those? I know people talk about them. We've seen them in other places around the world, but in some cases, I've heard the argument that they're kind of counterproductive. That people move to free trade zones temporarily for tax benefits and then they move back. Are you talking about more of a logistical place where goods move in and out rather than be manufactured there, or are you looking at places where value is added to products, or if you can elaborate to what your suggestion is on that?
So we're definitely talking about substantive value-added transformation. Precisely what you've talked about is, I think, some of the problems that we would have with the regime as it stands today, and loosening those rules to enable more production would actually build up our domestic capacity, in the manufacturing sector, and certainly create jobs for Canadians in the process.
That'll be the end for this group of witnesses. We have our next panel that will be waiting. Thank you to the witnesses for sharing very valuable information with us today. The committee, certainly, we all appreciated it very much. So stay safe, stay well. I'll suspend for a couple of minutes while we get the other panel set up. Thank you.
Thank you.
on the impact of the COVID-19 on Canadian international trade relationships, especially with the United States and the United Kingdom. For our third panel this afternoon, apologies that we're running a bit late today. We'll start with the Canadian-Europe Roundtable for Business, Mr. Langrish. There will be then followed by Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, Claire Citeau. And then the Centre d'études sur l'agriculture and modernization, Michel Rioux. And then the Partner for Technologies, Inc., George Partaka, Chief Executive Officer. So, Mr. Langrish, we'll start with you for approximately 5 minutes, please.
Sure. Nice to be here today. Hello to everyone and my fellow testimonials, I guess you're called, not sure. I'll keep my remarks brief. To the 5 minutes, I'll focus primarily on the United States and the United Kingdom. So first, broadly, the primary impact, I believe, of COVID-19 on international trade is the continued rise of the sentiment, my country first. We've obviously heard about it south of the border, voiced as America first, but it's the concept of that we're putting our countries before and their interests, at least as the politicians see them, ahead of the multilateral agreements that are in place. And I feel that that has the potential to be quite problematic. Principally, the reason I feel it will be problematic is there are some arguments for some self-sufficiency given what's happened and transpired, but this can quite easily morph into a wider and more unjustified form of protectionism, notably in the form of technical barriers to trade. That is, putting up barriers based on the fact that it's either not safe enough, the approvals are not robust enough, et cetera, et cetera. There's also some other issues as well. The nationalization of industries could run afoul of international trade commitments, and massive government expenditures as well could undercut things like state aid rules, which is something we may see play out in the negotiations between the UK and the EU, given the massive spending that Germany is making now in terms of their stimulus program and the money that's going to specific industries. When we look at the relations with the United States, I think our trade relations are generally under control. I mean, it's been a bumpy ride since Mr. Trump was elected as president. I think the government's done generally a pretty good job there. But, you know, we have to constantly be keeping an eye on things because protectionism pops up, as it has with aluminum, as it has with the border at times, as it has with protective devices, bans on exporting those into Canada, etc. The approval of the CUSMA agreement is good news. I think the border closing as a result of COVID is a more impactful development than the approval of CUSMA, which has largely been factored into business decision making since its agreement some time ago. But it's obviously important that we maintain a strong trading relationship with the US. The obvious reasons being national prosperity. Maybe the less obvious reason is we will need US support in dealing with difficult third-party issues such as the diplomatic dispute with China, including over Ms. Meng's extradition hearings. Turning to the UK, I think the real question for Canada is what will be the outcome of negotiations on a future relationship between the UK and the EU? In my view, the highest probability outcome at present is a hard Brexit, which would take place at the end of the year. That is, they would leave the customs union, the single market, and they would revert to WTO rules. Although there is a little bit of good news there in the sense that the British have unilaterally decided that they're going to remove import tariffs for countries with whom they have MFN status. So that would take some of the sting off of a hard Brexit for Canadian exporters. The problem with a hard Brexit, as I see it, is one, we will be unable to conclude a Canada-UK agreement to replace what the UK is currently a party to CETA, the Canada-EU trade deal. Obviously, if they leave the single market and the customs union, they will no longer be a party to CETA. So, well, frankly, once they leave the EU, they are no longer a party to CETA after the transition period. So we won't be able to conclude a Canada-UK agreement until we know the outcome of UK-EU talks. And then the second problem is if the UK leaves the single union, they'll no longer be covered by CETA. So we're going to have to do some work to get an alternate arrangement in place, but it would not make sense, in my view, to move forward with a trade agreement with the UK right now, because we just do not know where there'll be import tariffs into the EU, how will we deal with rules of origin, how we deal with financial services, and a whole host of other issues. So I think I'll end my remarks there. Thank you.
Mr. Langrich, on to Ms. Citeau, please, for 5 minutes.
Merci. Merci.
To the clerk. Ms. Citeau.
Can you hear me now?
There we are.
Okay.
Okay. Please go ahead.
Okay. So thank you for having me today. As you know, CAFTA is the voice of Canadian agri-food exporters, representing the 90% of farmers who depend on trade and the ranchers, processors, agri-food exporters who want to grow the economy through better access to international markets. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today with you about the state of global trade and what the road ahead may look like. 2020 was supposed to be a big year for trade for us, with the ratification of CUSMA, the need to address CETA issues, non-tariff trade barriers, the lack of respect for international trade rules, the necessity to modernize the WTO, opportunities to diversify in Asia, and creating a new post-Brexit trade relationship with the UK. Yet, in an instant, COVID upended the predictability and stability businesses and exporters need. The last few months have shown us just how foundational agri-food trade is for our economy and way of life. And while we're proud of the role our members have played in feeding Canadians and the world while also protecting jobs in a time of crisis, clear worries remain. Chief among them is the fear that this crisis will bring about new trade barriers and other forms of protectionism, and that trade commitments will be undermined and not followed. Given the topics today, I'll focus my remarks on, first, the need to continue to strengthen and improve existing trade relationships, the need to support WTO modernization and the rules-based global trading system, and the need to continue to open new markets, enforce free trade, and put agri-food trade at the center of the recovery. Canada has no more important trading partner than the US. Our members are very pleased that CUSMA is now in force. It will help ensure a continued strong foundation for uninterrupted trade with our closest neighbor and trading partner. Restoring stability and predictability to North American trade is essential for Canadian agri-food exporters that have developed highly integrated supply chains for the past generation across the continent, and especially so in the US. CUSMA will help restore the competitiveness of our North American free trade platform, normalize trade, not just for commodities, but also for value-added food products, and enable a globally competitive sector that drives the economy forward in all three countries. It will be important to monitor the proper implementation of the agreement to realize its full benefits. I'll point to two sectors in particular. The food processing sector is concerned with the implications of the front of pack labeling regulation, a trade irritant with the US, and the sugar industry, a key driver of food exports to the US. Discussions on the administration of TRQs create a level of uncertainty of access. It's very clear that the implementation of trade agreements is just as important as negotiating trade agreements, and perhaps even more so. Take CETA, our comprehensive agreement with the European Union. It will turn 3 this September, yet despite holding so much promise for agri-food exporters, it continues to fall short. This is because the EU is not abiding by commitments to remove technical barriers. We know there are solutions to these persisting barriers. Such work includes achieving mutual recognition of meat processing systems, developing protocols to verify livestock production practices, addressing misaligned regulation of crop protection products, more predictable and timely review of seed technologies, ensuring that Italy's country of origin labeling requirements are not applied in a trade restrictive manner, addressing as well production and trade distorting EU sugar subsidies that make our exports uneconomic. Italy, for example, provide actually an example where Canada needs to be more assertive in defending our trade interests. Quiet conversations to date have not resolved issues. It's important that Canada challenges these so that Italy protectionist measures do not spill over into other countries and products. We've asked the Canadian government to take up these issues with EU political leaders in order to secure commitments and timelines to remove and address the barriers that persist. As the world is moving towards the enforcement of rules, Canada too should step up its response and push for enforcement. Vietnam, Peru, India, and others, the list goes on of countries that do not follow internationally agreed upon protocol, that do not live up to their bilateral and WTO commitments, and maintain unwarranted SPS measures. All of these create significant risks and uncertainty for exporters. Canada needs to be proactive and nimble in its response to the growing use of non-tariff barriers being used to block agriculture and food exports. The current crisis has also shown us why we need a rules-based global trading system. CAFTA is pleased that the federal government has been at the forefront of efforts to safeguard the WTO and the rules-based trading system, this done in large part through the Ottawa Group. The Ottawa Group, led by Canada and initially created to find ways to reform the WTO, has played a major role in keeping supply chains open to agri-food trade during the crisis and in sinking commitments from WTO members to limit and unwind the 200+ trade restrictions adopted by 93 countries as a result of the crisis. It is imperative that this work continues. In parallel, the Ottawa Group needs to drive forward WTO reforms to fix the dispute resolution processes, to ensure ongoing functionality, to revitalize the multilateral negotiation process, and restructure the overall governance of the WTO. Amidst the crisis created by the pandemic, we must recognize that it's absolutely vital to get WTO reform right. We should fully expect that many countries will be tempted to use the current crisis to restrict trade and introduce non-tariff barriers disguised as excuses with protectionist motives. And this is precisely why we need a solid, functioning WTO that can deliver on stable, predictable, open rules-based trade as recovery begins to take root.
Ms. Cito, I'm
now
sorry.
is the time to
I'm
step
sorry,
on the gas
time
and not
is,
the pump.
if you could just hold your closing remarks,
to diversify.
Ms. Cito, if you could just
Yes?
do your closing remarks or your last few statements, maybe you could get them in answer to some of the questions that
All
the
right,
witnesses are.
do-
That's all
I'll do
right?
so.
Okay, thank you very much.
So as in closing, I will say that as people around the world need to continue to eat, agri-food trade gives us one of the best engines for growth. We need to look at ways to strengthen relationships, including with China, grow and modernize our existing FTAs, whether it's to launch FTA talks with the ASEAN, launch talks with countries that have expressed interest in joining the CPTPP, including the UK. And perhaps on the UK specifically, I'll add that given that it's one of our largest trading partners in Europe, it's important that Canada engages
Keep going. I think she's having difficulty. Okay, Ms. Cito, maybe your end remark. Can you hear me? Hello.
with a lot of delay.
Okay. Well,
I
maybe you
just
can stop.
reheard
Maybe you
your
can stop.
earlier comments.
Okay. So maybe you can just stop at this point, Ms. Cito, and then so that we'll have time to have the members ask you questions.
Okay. Sure.
Okay. Thank you very much. On to Ms. Rioux for 5 minutes, please.
Oui, bonjour.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me today. I am director of a center referred to as the Center for Integration and Globalization. And right now we are asking ourselves questions about what happens after COVID and the impact on the pandemic on Canada's international trade, and particularly on our economic system. First of all, I totally agree with Ms. Cito on the importance of delving into multilateralism and its interactions with agreements that Canada signs. That's very important for our policies to be consistent, for our long-term trade policies to be consistent. It's particularly important for the future of the international community to make sure that bilateral or regional trade agreements do not put to question cooperation at multilateral level. I know that it's always taken for granted that bilateral agreements go in the direction of multilateralism, but at the center, at our center, we've worked on the possible divergences that exist between a multilateral system and bilateral agreements. And there's a fragmentation in the system. Let me start by saying that our approach is to find out how COVID has impacted and mostly shed light on the flaws that exist in our society, in our international community, and the instruments of institutions that exist for the rules of law and the interventions that are supposed to stabilize the system. We believe that our society, the international community, was not equipped to deal with this current pandemic. And to deal with future pandemics like this one, it's very important to look not only into the short-term responses, but to think in the medium and long term. So this health crisis has revealed the flaws in the collective action, which we believe would be a catalyst for change and transformation. COVID-19 has forced us to rethink economic policies, trade exchanges. As a friend said at the beginning, he talked about the idea of made in Quebec, made in Canada, made in America. It is true that there's potential relocation which could be dangerous. But this globalization and trade forces us to rethink the roles of institutions. For us, we think that we need to look at what obtains before and after COVID. This is a historic moment that is at the juncture between various approaches.
Problem with the translation. Could you just hold on for a second?
Madame Rioux, au bas de votre...
Madame Rio, at the bottom of your screen, you should see a sign stating interpretation. Could you please go to the French channel? Very well. I thought I was going to be asked to speak in English. I was ready to do so, but it's okay. I'll continue in French. Thank you. The worst-case scenario that we discussed, well, we organized a number of workshops, and we'll continue these workshops till December. The worst scenario will be the shutting down borders and the highly intrusive surveillance system that could emerge. Some of our colleagues wrote about that deglobalization is not necessarily desirable in many sectors. We are currently documenting this deglobalization, and there are many nuances involved. So we agree with Canada's approach, which seems to be that we need to safeguard supply chains and also find out how we could carry out interventions to make sure that our supply chains are secured so that we continue providing Canadian supplies. The next thing is the possibilities, the dangers of fragmentation, national isolation, trade wars, deglobalization. These risks or dangers should not be underestimated. Another major problem we foresee is growing inequalities, economic concentration, and the legitimacy of the international trade system, which would be compromised. All these dangers should be taken seriously. So our approach is to working on these issues and particularly work on policies, interventions of states, and to find out how they could tie in with a more regulated globalization. At the same time, economies should remain open to trade and investment. The objective should be to work on stabilizing the trade system, which could become more progressive, particularly looking at the approach Canada has adopted over the past few years. To come back specifically to the UK, we believe that, and I'm trying to go fast, we should try to negotiate a bilateral agreement to make sure that there is consistency at the level of transatlantic trade and that we continue working with European countries in the same manner as we did before Brexit. And we should consider that the agreement with the UK should be part of a third generation series of policies that take into account standards, regulations, as promised by CETA. For COSMA, we need to be careful when it comes to transparency and the cultural aspects and e-trade, e-commerce. There are many issues that come up with the cultural issues. And I believe that there's going to be a major test when it comes to our trade relations with the US. It's going to be very important to clearly define our objectives when it comes to our cultural sovereignty and our digital sovereignty. These are all important stakes. These are also stakes that will be ensuring the survival of our institutions here in Canada.
On to Mr. Partica.
Okay,
Mr.
can you hear me
Partica,
okay?
It's your 5 minutes now. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you so much. I won't be that long, but generally I want to thank the committee for this opportunity to speak today, and nice to meet everybody. It would have been very, very useful if I had heard some of these comments earlier on, because it would have probably added to or supported some of the statements. I agree with everybody's got very valid points. But first, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce what PTI Transformers are. We probably aren't well known out there. We're not a brand name as such, but we are the largest privately owned Canadian manufacturer of transformers in Canada. And we were established in January of 1989. And we started manufacturing in 1990. And currently we are now building up to 500 MVA transformers, which it's similar to like 500,000 horsepower if you want to equate it to something you're more familiar with. And we have over 300,000 square feet and employ over 300 skilled personnel in Canada. And in 2015, we purchased CG Power Systems Canada, which was owned by India, and we brought that technology back to Canada. And we are continuing to reinvest in the technology and support the Canadian industry. And we're bringing back a lot of the stuff that was lost over the last 40 years. Like in North America, there's not a whole lot made that you can't buy at Costco right now in Canada or the United States for that matter. Most of it is brought in from Asia. So my concern is more to do with Asia. And we've been seeing a lot of penetration in our market from Asia, and we have some concerns. We performed very well, both financially and technically since inception, and despite the most recent impacts from COVID-19, we remained open throughout the pandemic period without layoffs and without support. We continued uninterrupted business with all our Canadian and US customers. We do not export to Europe. Business and market demand for our product has decreased recently due to the economic slowdown and the COVID-19 and the resulting decreases in new construction projects, along with corresponding impacts on North American supply chain. PTI Transformers also impacted by recent steel tariffs imposed by the US and dumping from foreign competition. To this, we undertook an initiative by twice filing and winning dumping complaints against Korean manufacturers. And they're my major concern right now. This in itself was costly and time-consuming venture, but the resulting anti-dumping tariffs are of benefit to Canada. Relationships with other countries in the US and all our customers continues to be amicable. However, there is noticeably more and more focus by many customers to buy local. So Jason, to your point, there's obviously a lot of interest now to buy local and for various reasons, whether it's for grid security reasons in our case or more dependable sources of supply and service. So there's definitely a move afoot all over the place in North America, especially to buy local. Also, I would like to take this opportunity to commend the politicians in our provincial jurisdictions for all their unified stance with public health authorities, along with their positive approach to addressing the COVID-19 pandemic. Frequent and positive communications apprising the public of the current ongoing health status and plans for reopening the economy was, in my opinion, paramount to reaching the success we achieved thus far in battling this virus. Although concerns may still be apparent regarding a potential second wave in the fall, we can all take solace in the fact that this has proven successful approach can once again be followed and potentially even be improved. PTI Transforma's strategy was to follow recommendations by public health authorities, and although there were times when it was tempting to consider deviating to a more stringent but difficult to manage alternatives in addressing this virus, this ultimately garnered good results we have today. Their unified approach and good communication helped stave off our temptation to move to a little more difficult to manage alternatives. We have learned a lot these past few months, and although there are still many Canadian casualties, I am very proud of their efforts and what we have all been able to accomplish together. So my commendation to all the politicians. It's been difficult, but yet they've, in my opinion, they've come through. In addition to the COVID-19 pandemic and the steel tariffs imposed by the U.S., PTI's business opportunity has most recently been impacted, and if not addressed or corrected, will have dire consequences going forward, regardless of a pandemic, or even be further compromised by a pandemic if it reoccurs. One particular circumstance I'd like to bring forward to the committee is Wataynikaneyap project in Northern Ontario. And this project connects the Hydro One's electrical grid to many First Nations communities that are currently running on undependable diesel, economically not viable. It's dirty and environmentally not warranted currently. So it's a big project. And unfortunately, the project, although it represents about 27% of our capacity for annual capacity for next year, it has been given to the Koreans, who twice were charged of dumping into Canada, the same company. So it's a federally funded project, and I'm just voicing my concern now because I find that that's been it's a surprise event for me, and it represents over 100 person years of direct employment, 20 person years of engineering and professional employment, and it's come at a time when the work should be direly needed in Canada, and our company's here to do that.
Mr. Pardiga, could I just get your closing? Okay, thank you very much.
That's it. Yeah.
That's it. All right. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Mr. Partika, for your presentation today. I'm glad to hear that you and your business seem to be weathering the pandemic better than most. I'm very curious about your experience with the federally funded, and I'm going to try and pronounce it correctly, the Wataynikaneyap project in Northern Ontario. Could you tell us about the bid process for that particular project, and why you feel that your company was not successful in that particular bid?
First off, we were the project was in two stages. The first stage was done so a major contractor could be selected. So we had tendered our offering to several bidders for the whole project. The entire project then was let to one contractor, and then it was rebid. After it was rebid, we were working on it for about a year, and then come January, we were advised that the project went to the North Koreans or the South Koreans. I'm not sure where we were in position, but some of it covered transformers that were already dumped, and other transformers were not. So it didn't fall under the dumping provisions. Why we were not awarded the project, I'm assuming it was all price, but I couldn't comment. I don't have that information.
You've made past dumping complaints against the South Koreans before. Can you give the committee an idea of how involved a process it is to file such complaints when you believe that dumping is happening?
First, there was another supplier or manufacturer that also entered into the dumping complaint. This was done both in the U.S. and in Canada. We had one twice in Canada. There was a 5-year period and then a second 5-year period. So for 10 years, we were able to prove that the dumping was occurring from South Korea. And that is supported through a lengthy process. It probably went about a year. We hired lawyers in Ottawa for contact with the governments and the Trade Tribunal. And this went on for a period of a year. A lot of the information that had to be shown was that we were harmed and also that they were dumping, and we got support and information from a lot of customers in Canada that showed that that was the case.
And so from your perspective, could you tell the committee what the federal government needs to do with future free trade agreements to stop these dumping practices from happening?
Policies, I guess one thing I found out off the record was that some of the tariffs were not being collected. And the reasons for that was that they're not being reported properly. So I believe further to, I think Michelle's point was that there has to be better regulations put in place so that clarification on what type of product is being imported and from where are better regulated and supported through CBSA. I think CBSA is very busy. And perhaps there's some issues they have with paperwork and trying to get these products identified. And as a result, there may be some erratic reporting that goes on that doesn't help identify the product, so tariffs cannot be collected. So regulations have to be improved. I believe CBSA has to be better supported. There's obviously some better control on pricing by from procurement fields. I believe that there's some policies that right now with the world open globally, it's very difficult to control where prices are coming from and whether the standards are being met. We do a lot of investment to make sure we comply with standards. We test in accordance with standards. But I believe there's probably some flexibility going on out there that I'm not aware of. And perhaps CSA standards have to be strengthened a little bit more. I'm pretty aware that Canadian Welding Bureau does not go to Asia and approve plants for the welding and whether it's good for -50 or -40. I can't vouch for that, but I'm pretty sure CWB doesn't go there and make sure of that.
Thank you very much, sir. On to Mr. Dhaliwal.
Chair, my question is going to Ms. Sito and Mr. Langresh. Minister Ng has stated publicly that the future Canada-UK free trade agreement will be based on UK-EU free trade agreement. Based on this statement, what are the members of CAPTA thinking about this statement? And also to Mr. Langresh, what is there that can be added when the new negotiations take place that is not in the CETA agreement?
So perhaps I can go first, and I want to clarify earlier on. I had a lot of technical difficulties. There was an echo, and I could hear people talking 3 times, so it was very challenging. Particularly as it comes to the statement you're talking about. I'm not sure I clearly understand what specific statement you are referring to, but I understand it's about the UK. And as it pertains to the UK, given it's one of our largest trading partners in Europe, and with under 6 months until the UK's full separation from the EU, and the fact that some of our competitors are already deeply engaged in full-blown negotiations with that important market, our view is that Canada should formally engage and seek to conclude negotiations of an ambitious Canada-EU free trade agreement that removes tariffs and non-tariff barriers, that provides liberal rules of origins and secure the level playing fields, and this at the earliest time. We must be looking for an edge in a fiercely competitive global economy, and our competitors are actively doing this, and ultimately our success depends on how well Canada opens the door for us around the world, so we need to be at the table as well.
Hello, Mr. Lang. Yes. So when you posed the question, the screen froze and I didn't hear it, but I'm assuming you want to know about the prospects for a Canada-UK agreement. Is that correct?
That's number one. And secondly, is there anything that we did not have in CETA agreement that you would like to see moving forward?
Sure. Okay. Generally speaking, I agree with Claire's remarks with regards to having an ambitious agreement. I think we need to have something there. Now, at my opening remarks, I said I thought that there was going to be a hard Brexit. And in fact, if I'm being blunt, I think that the political leadership feels that the economic fallout, the UK political leadership believes that the economic fallout can, to a degree, be pinned on COVID. So I think they see a bit of an out here. I mean, if you look at the way the negotiations are going between the UK and the EU, it's not very good. So the best that they're going to be able to achieve by the end of the year, if they do get an agreement, is a very skinny, probably tariff-only agreement. So starting with that point. Now, it would be nice, we had a rollover agreement, a CETA-like agreement that was in place and basically ready to go and replace, and cover the UK-Canada relationship. However, then the British government came along and surprised everyone by saying that they were going to remove import tariffs. So that was a big, piece of the agreement that they were giving away for free. So I think within the department in Canada, the negotiators in the department, there's a little bit of they're a bit unsure about exactly what the UK may, put on the table next. But I just don't know that we're going to be able to do have an agreement in place prior to knowing the resolution between the UK and the EU. So, for example, how would you treat rules of origin if they're outside of the customs union? I mean, for instance, typically you need at least 50% to 60% of content in your goods to qualify for duty-free status. A UK that is outside of the European single market will they be able to meet those provisions? And we won't know if we even need to negotiate rules of origin until we know what they have agreed upon. So I think realistically, we probably will not have an agreement in place until in 2021. Now, I think we can take quite a high level of ambition into these negotiations. Where I would like to see better progress, we still do not have conformity assessment in place 2 years on in the CETA agreement. Basically, what that means is if a product is certified in Canada and exported over to, say, Germany, it doesn't have to be retested and recertified again. It's seen as being equivalent. Now, we agreed this in CETA, but the problem is it still has not been implemented. We also see continuing problems with technical barriers to trade. Claire has raised this, notably on the agricultural front. I think we need a more robust process for preventing technical barriers to trade. There's also been some confusion around the regulatory cooperation provisions. I think a lot of people, the Regulatory Cooperation Committee within CETA is for going after future regulatory barriers. However, I think most people, certainly in the private sector, believe it's a forum for dealing with existing regulatory barriers. So I think there needs to be more clarity around this in a future agreement. And then I think
Sir,
that...
I have to interrupt. The time is up. Thank you very much. On to Monsieur Savard-Tremblay.
Oui, bonjour.
Good afternoon. I thank all witnesses. Thank you for your presentations. My question goes to Madame Rio. Your presentation talked about the need for trade for our supply chains, but you also talked about exceptions that we need to maintain. And everything is not a merchandise, and we need to clearly define what we do in future negotiations. You talked, you in an anticipation of a future agreement with the UK, and you said we should use CETA as a basis. And from the rumors we are hearing, the two are likely to be similar, very similar. Maybe the same agreement being signed in a bilateral way. How do we ensure that the concerns you have raised about exemptions that were respected in CETA and this time around, which could be there again? How do we make sure? Because we were told some time ago when we were discussing signing the agreement, we said the government had sacrificed cheese in favor of beef. And we were being told that the market was going to be huge, but finally the access was not as simple as we expected. So what could be corrected, in your opinion, now that we are anticipating a new agreement with the UK, which is no longer bound by the agreements we have with the European Union? That's many questions in one question. I'll try to answer. Let me come back to what you said. Deregulation, how we could access the European market. There are many technicalities involved. Last month, we had a meeting organized by Global Affairs with the Belgians, and we discussed the impact of CETA. There was not necessarily the same enthusiasm. What was said is that instead of negotiating an agreement, we need to have strategies, trade strategies. There's a need for assistance. We need to find out. Well, Jason a while ago talked about regulatory cooperation. In our work, we underscore the importance of that issue. So we are not only working about trade barriers and tariffs, looking about the markets on the other side of the front of the borders, but we are trying to look at the rules, regulations that exist that could be restrictions, and also regulations that could be there to protect us. And that is why COVID is pushing us to look at these things. The current regulations that exist, eliminating barriers, promoting market access and exports on both sides of the Atlantic. At the same time, we need to move forward with the barriers we want to see. Well, not necessarily barriers, but regulations that we want to implement. With the Europeans, I think we can go very far. And even with the UK, it's something we are seeing. Even with regulations for e-trade, with social media, it's like the American approach, which is in the defensive. But all this shows that regulatory cooperation is very important in the future, not only to help pave the way for trade, but also to create an institutional basis for clear rules, but should also be consistent with the general public interest. I work a lot with cultural industries, and it's very important. You know, now we have laws that will be amended in Canada, and we do not want to find ourselves with trade policy problems and trade wars. I don't know if I forgot something, but those exceptions you talked about, well, it's about cultural trade, cheese, and so on and so forth. There are societal issues at stake here.
Merci.
Thank you. Well, 20 seconds left. I don't have much time to talk about my preamble and then get back to your answers. Thank you very much for your previous answers.
Thank you very much. Ms. Matheson.
Thank you to all the guests to the committee. I think I actually will probably build on what my colleague was getting to in some way. For a question for, I think, Madame Citeau and Rioux together, potentially. I think that we all understand well the benefits of trade, especially in the eyes of the agricultural sector. That's, no one disputes that. Having access and growing those markets is key. However, often we've seen within these very large multilateral agreements that we're pitting one sector against the other. And even within the agricultural sector, we saw a key loss under CETA, the TPP, and the new NAFTA for our supply managed sectors. About 10%. So very much so, even within one industry of agriculture, there was quite a lot of division. So in terms of how we look at future trade, there were discussions here now, but we can't lose sight of multilateral negotiations. However, we're seeing so much conflict within that. So have you thought about potentially looking at sectoral trade and the benefits of what that would have so that we're not pitting one industry against another?
I think in general, we much prefer a multilateral regional agreements because of the market opportunities that are much larger in scope. The rules of origin that we seek. Bilateral agreements is something that Canada has done. Our preference has been in recent years to prefer multilateral agreements. As for sectoral agreements, they are only limited to areas such as cooperation. They do not address tariffs and non-tariff barriers in significant, comprehensive ways for our sector. So, not something that our membership has been advocating for, at least to my knowledge, in recent years.
Peut-être ajouter quelque chose? Oui, bonjour.
Thank you for the question. I can hear myself in English. I think the issue of sectoral agreements may be envisaged. There's been a lot of success in the past. I studied the agreement on basic telecommunications, and it was later generalized. I think we can make a lot of progress with sectoral agreements. But I believe that this could be a double-edged sword that turns against us, because sometimes when we have something to give, a trade-off could be interesting. So we may find ourselves with a sectoral agreement that doesn't allow us to compromise. So it may be positive, but it's not always a win-win situation.
Oh, good. In terms of the negotiations that we saw with the new NAFTA, there was an elimination of the investor state dispute settlement mechanisms, which New Democrats were really quite happy to see. Within the CETA agreement, of course, there was the highly controversial investor court system, which is very similar to ISDS. And it has caused a lot of controversy within the European Union as well. So if we move forward with a UK deal, like to hear the panelists' feelings on the insurance that a future FTA doesn't include something like an ICS or ISDS.
Whoever would like to answer Ms. Matheson's question briefly.
Je pense que ça, c'est une question complexe.
That's a complex question. I will try to answer. Even if we were to negotiate a mechanism with the UK, an investor state dispute settlement mechanism, there are other avenues. I imagine the interpreter signals that there's a sound problem with the speaker. I had not switched. I believe that there are ways of making sure that we have the same type of mechanism. Well, I'm not answering the question as to whether we are for or against. Throughout the world, those mechanisms are being discussed. We're trying to look at all the nuances and protections that are provided to states. Even at the European Union with CETA, we are going to see what to do, but there's lots of institutional innovations that are underway and that need to be modernized. So I don't believe that this is something that is stuck in time. It's open for exploration. Thank you very much.
Yes, on to Mr. Hoback for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here this nice day. It's 5 minutes isn't enough, Chair. I think you know that, but one of the things that I think I'll maybe go to Mr. Tito first is, one of the concerns I have post-COVID is the countries using non-tariff trade barriers to restrict access to protect domestic sectors as they try to recover economically in their country. In the ag side of things, of course, they use all sorts of items like we've seen in Italy and we've seen in China, for example, on canola, and we've seen it in India and a few other countries that you mentioned too. Do you think the government has put in place enough people, for example, CFIA inspectors? Do you think our trade commissioners are positioned properly? Do you think we have the mechanisms in place for this turmoil that's coming in front of us? Do you think they've properly prepared, or are you aware of many changes they've made in regards to making sure we can represent Canadian companies in these countries when this turmoil erupts? So I'll start with you, Ms. Cito.
I'm not aware of myself of changes, or at least recently, but it's certainly an area that we need to look at these as these trade barriers continue to increase. As I mentioned, the list of countries continue to increase when it comes to countries adopting non-tariff barriers. Certainly the need, the opportunities to have boots on the ground even before those issues become problems can certainly help. This is something that some of our members are asking for in certain countries and regions of the world to make sure that non-tariff barriers are dealt with before they become problems. Having trade commissioners on the ground doing advocacy can certainly be helpful as well. And overall, I think it can only help when it comes to making sure that the rules are enforced and respected around the world. This is certainly one of our major issues and concerns for our members today.
You know, I'm a big fan of the trade commissioners. In fact, I want to compliment them. I know when this crisis erupted, a lot of them shifted to find the PPE supplies that we got into Canada, and we're trying to help in the logistics in regards to that. And a lot of them stayed in countries that probably they would prefer to come back to Canada. But, you know, that's one of my concerns now is we've had a lot of our bureaucracy that's been around the world stationed in countries that are important to us come back to Canada. And now what's the process of getting them back to the countries moving forward post-COVID and reflecting on making sure our Canadian companies have proper representation and Canadian travelers in the future are properly represented and taken care of too. So, you know, that is one concern I have. I'm going to shift a little bit to the UK. You know, one of the things I'm hearing from ag producers, and a classic example, last night I was on a conference call with some ag producers out of Southern Ontario. They grow lots of beans. They sell a lot of those beans into the UK. And they're very nervous that they don't know what the price of those beans is going to be on January 1st because they don't know what possible tariffs could be in place or not in place. And the other concern they have is when they see other countries that compete with them, for example, the U.S. May have first mover opportunity, which is what we had in Japan with TPP that really gave us good market access and great advantage. Are you concerned that we haven't entered a negotiation with the UK and that we haven't even done the simple stuff as far as the easy, low-hanging fruit and at least get that out of the way?
I think certainly there's been some of the anxiety that our members feel not only about non-tariff barriers, but also the pace of negotiations that some of our competitors have adopted when it comes to negotiating free trade agreements around the world. So that has been the case with the UK, but other countries as well. We know that we lose when our competitors are first to markets. We are also after, so seeing the US, Australia, the EU engage with the UK is certainly raises eyebrows and questions, but that's also the case with the US and China or the EU and Thailand and others, all certainly create some anxiety, and Canada's response they find in large part our global competitiveness and provide or not confidence on a path forward. So that's why we support the inclusion of the UK among Canada's priorities for negotiation. And it's important that Canada be actively engaged in the discussions with the UK, not necessarily a wait and see approach.
Yeah, I was talking to one of the grain companies, this actually was a couple of years ago, and they were concerned, they sell a lot of wheat into Warburton's, and they were trying to figure out how to figure out their pricing mechanism in their futures contracts by not having visibility on what that was going to look like. So they were raising that issue for sure. Do you think that we're going to see a lot more challenges and a lot more ruckus, for lack of a better word, in our trading markets over the next year or year and a half? Do you get sense from talking to your producers that it's not business as usual like it has been in the past?
A short response, if possible.
I think certainly the road ahead is going to be rocky for us. We need to make sure that our existing free trade agreements are going to work and that we continue to diversify. But we can't take what we had before the pandemic for granted, that's for sure.
Okay, thank you very much. On to Ms. Bedian.
Madame la Présidente, voilà.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Citeau, who've spoken on several occasions during the pandemic. It's a pleasure to see you virtually once again. Do you hear me very well? Yes. Great. My question is more general, considering that your sector was particularly hit hard by COVID-19 globally. As you know, Minister Ng and others have worked very hard to play a leadership role in the international community to push forward international trade, to make sure that we do not turn to isolation so that we can avoid protectionism. I'm thinking about the declaration of the 21st of April that was signed with 20 other WTO countries this year to make sure that there was open trade for food products. That was important for you, I know. Could you please give us a summary of how you lived through that period? Do you think that the government of Canada so far has adopted a strong position and has maintained the importance of international trade within the international community? If you look at our communications over the past few months, you would see that CAFTA has strongly welcomed the efforts made by Canada, mostly by the Ottawa Group, regarding maintaining open frontiers for agro-food products, and these allowed families to continue to receive food. We often think of the agro-food industry when we think of what we find in the stores, but there are a lot of other sectors, the distribution sector, retailers, the transport sector, that are all involved. For all these to work, for all these sectors to work, they need workers, they need services. Maintaining the borders open to these products made sure that all these sectors continue to work. This helped feed people and also helped people to keep their jobs and also helped the economy to remain active. The work that was done was very important. And as I said before, even though I had many technical difficulties, there was a lot of echo. I would like to reiterate that the work was very important, but the work must continue. The last communique from the Ottawa Group talks about the fact that restrictions that were adopted by some countries during the pandemic should be limited and should expire. That work should also continue. We also have questions that we will be submitting to the committee and the government very soon. We have observed some issues during the pandemic. So there are suggestions that the Ottawa Group could look into. Great.
With the Canada-Europe Roundtable for Business, I understand that you have been around for about 20 years with very interesting membership. I was wondering if you could comment a little bit on something that you mentioned earlier. I believe you said earlier that it was your opinion that we might not come to a negotiation or a final agreement, rather, with the United Kingdom until 2021, again, in your opinion. I was just wondering if that were the case, what what do you think would be our most prudent step forward in order to ensure after CETA no longer applies at the end of the year that there is predictability for our exporters here in Canada?
Thanks. Well, it is worth remembering this is largely on the UK. The UK made the decision to leave the European Union. And so the UK is the demandor in all of these things, including their discussions with the EU and discussions with third parties like Canada. In my view, they haven't done a very good job in terms of outlining what their priorities are. It's poorly defined, and they're a difficult party to negotiate with. They don't have a lot of capacity. The trade negotiations have been conducted by Brussels for the last 40 plus years. They've been doing their best to build up their capacity, but it's not really there. So there's just a couple things. The first is, I think there was a remark that why aren't we doing anything while the US and other countries are negotiating? Well, we have been doing things with them. We have been discussing a rollover agreement that's sort of a CETA-like agreement that would be put in place in the event of a no deal scenario. However, as I mentioned, the UK government unilaterally said we're going to remove all import tariffs. Well, I mean, that's a huge piece of what would have been negotiated, which was negotiating away those tariffs. So basically, we could get it for free. We don't even need to negotiate an agreement to get that tariff reduction. So that kind of changes the dynamics. Also, the idea that the UK is going to strike a deal with the US this year, I mean, this is not very realistic. With an election campaign, the difficulties of getting the deal through Congress. So I think what we need to do is we need to keep the lines of discussion open with the British. We should be having concurrent discussions with them. But we're just going to have to face the reality that there's going to be some chapters of a potential Canada-UK deal that will look something like a CETA deal that we won't be able to close before we know what the UK and the EU are going to agree at. And first and foremost on that is how much is their regulatory approach going to diverge?
Sorry, I have to cut you off, Mr. Language.
Well, but these are the key answers to the question. So if you don't want to hear that, then okay.
We certainly do. It's just that each member has to get, I still have 2 members to get their time up as well, as much as, so there's only so much time. I'm sorry about that. Mr. Cram.
Yes, thank you. And I'll be splitting my time with Mr. Lewis for this round of questioning. So, Mr. Partika, are you aware of any requirements during the procurement process for the electrical project in Northern Ontario? Are you aware of the past dumping by the South Koreans being taken into consideration in the procurement process for that particular project?
Not aware of it. No, I'm pretty confident that the same kind of approach was taken by the Koreans, but I'm sorry, I'm not privy to the procurement side of things, so I couldn't comment on that.
All right, and just in general terms, is there anything else that policymakers should be doing or need to be aware of to stop unfair dumping practices?
Mainly influence training procurement specialists and procurement officers so that they are more aware of what dumping means. I think the incentive for all these people is just to buy low and not to consider the real value or the fact that there is dumping going on. It's a lengthy process to determine dumping. But on the other hand, 90% of the material is traded on the open exchange, so it shouldn't be difficult for them to realize where the price level should be in the first place. So I'm thinking training would be the biggest thing for procurement awareness, mainly.
All right, thank you. And I said I'd be splitting my time with Mr. Lewis, so I'll hand things over to him.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my colleague, Mr. Cram. I would like to continue to hear from Mr. Langrish. So, sir, if you could continue on your answer from the former question, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, it's just to say we're we cannot close chapters on rules of origin. We spent almost 2 years negotiating rules of origin and going through lists with which services would be covered, those types of things. This is a very lengthy process. The idea that we're going to be able to get this all done and ready to go by the end of the year is, in my view, it's just not realistic. So we need to advance a CETA-like deal with the UK and have those negotiations occurring, those talks, and take those discussions as far as we can go, but be cognizant of the fact that until we know what the outcome of the UK-EU talks are, we will not be able to close certain chapters of an agreement.
Very well, thank you. And I guess probably a question specifically for Madame, I believe it's Madame Situ. If I mispronounced that, I apologize. But for anybody else that would like to jump in, feel free. Obviously, the WTO, specifically to our wine industry, I believe their decision has been pushed off till July the 17th, which I suppose in a lot of ways is perhaps good news for us. At least there's still a fighting chance. I'm wondering if there's any other industries out there that you know of specifically that are equally as concerned with our relationship with the WTO and or Australia kind of being bullied into a corner. Thoughts from any of the experts here?
For the record, we represent a large portion of the agriculture and agri-food sector, not the supply and managed sector, not the wine industry, but beef, pork, wheat, cereals, all seeds, grains, pulses, malt, and sugar and processed food products. We are very concerned about the state of the WTO, which needs to be modernized. Its dispute settlement system is not fully operating. There needs to be reform work done on its negotiating processes, as well as the overall governance of the organization. The Doha round has not moved for a long time, yet it's remained a very important forum for us to address not only dispute settlement, as well as important things like domestic agriculture, domestic subsidies. So we absolutely need the WTO because it's the basis for the global rules-based trading system. There needs to be adherence to the rules that need to be made based on science as well. So it's really important that it continues to function properly and deliver on stable, predictable trade. This is really essential for our own economic recovery.
Thank you.
Mr. Sarai.
This is for you, Ms. Sete. Canadian pulses, grains are one of our major trading sources, trading commodities. And in my riding, we have a big port and grain terminal is just being completed, along with a lot of lentils and pulses that get exported out of some of the rail and port terminals there. The concern has been valid. It's been, Mr. Hoback has said it, many countries have used non-tariff trading penalties. How do you see when foreign entities, countries unilaterally impose non-tariff barriers, and we know they have no validity on them, they're simply made to protect their own commodities or be punitive for other various reasons. What measures do you think, other than trade commissioners, would be able to, I guess, prevent this from happening or have better punitive measures so that those countries don't do that again?
Well, there are mechanisms. There should be bilateral mechanisms in the case of bilateral free trade agreements, or regional mechanisms in the case of regional free trade agreements, such as the CPTPP. But there's also the WTO, which sets the basis for the rules. And as you've said, there are a number of countries that have adopted a number of non-tariff measures disguised as protectionist measures in our view. So for legitimate, but way too often illegitimate reasons. So when tariffs used to be one of the most important factors in free trade agreements, now tariffs are only the top of the icebergs, and non-tariff barriers is what countries have used to block agri-food exports. So it's really important that we continue to work not only on a bilateral basis, but also at the WTO to enforce the rules.
Do you anticipate more protectionist measures as the global environment to be more me or my country only or protectionist environment is increasing, or do you think it has stabled off because of food necessity?
That is very much the fear. If you see how quickly countries were to adopt various measures to restrict trade, we can only fear what may come ahead. In particular, as countries have talked about the need to turn inward to secure their own food supply. Our view is that we need to diversify and reinforce supply chains. We have proven that they have worked and continued to feed Canadians and the world during the crisis. So we certainly have a lot of the resources to continue to do so. The need to turn inward should not be the response. What we need to do is actually push on the pedal and diversify and make sure that trade works and is based on rules so that there is stability and predictability of trade.
Thank you. To Mr. Langrish, can you tell us how much trade has increased with Europe ever since CETA has been implemented? Do we have a number yet? I know that the time frame has been short since it's been implemented and people have actually taken effect, but is there a number that we have? I think you're on mute, sir, if you can unmute yourself.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah, I believe there was a study report issued late last year that, if my memory is correct, the Europeans had done a bit better. They had about a 10 or 11% increase in trade, and Canada had seen about a 6 or 7%. But I'd need to check, but I believe that numbers are roughly along. But it is worth bearing one thing. The protectionist measures taken in Italy have dramatically reduced durum wheat exports into the European Union. If that hadn't occurred, Canada's exports would have increased. The numbers would be much stronger.
And I wanted to know, it's an ongoing challenge when we talk to businesses, especially small and medium-sized businesses. They're not as aware of the opportunities that CETA perhaps has for them. What's the best way we can increase the knowledge or the awareness of the opportunities with CETA so that small and medium-sized enterprises in Canada all over the place can actually play ball as if they're a European Union member under CETA and ship their goods and trade with CETA? Are there ways or better practices other countries have used to increase trade in this regards?
Well, that's a tricky one, and the definition of a small and medium-sized enterprise varies. You know, in Germany, it can be a $5 billion company is still considered an SME or $2 billion company, whereas in Canada, it's generally much smaller. Typically, SMEs don't have the resources to participate as aggressively in international trade. Most of it's global supply chains. So, you know, it's larger corporations and their suppliers. Most of it's intra-company trade. So it's dominated by larger corporations. And the way small and medium-sized enterprises tend to participate is in these supply chains. So they tend to be contractors to the larger firms. Just as George has mentioned, his business is largely, providing materials to these larger, I guess in the case of the Watay Power Project, I believe it's Fortis is one of the principal procurers. So that's often how it occurs. So I think one of the things is not to separate SMEs from the larger corporates, because they occupy the same ecosystem. And so when you see, the larger Canadian firms going into the European market, say if you're doing trade missions and things of that nature, I wouldn't separate and just have an SME trade mission and then just have a large corporate trade mission. I'd put them all together.
Okay.
Your time is up. Thank you very much to our witnesses. You've really given us some very valuable information today from all of you, so thank you very, very much. Please stay safe and stay well. To the committee members, thank you all for coming today, and I think it was a very informative day. So please stay well, stay safe, and adjourn the meeting.
Thank you.